Chapter 101 Ramon 2. Wya stared at Poutre in confusion, but the latter only furrowed his brows and made a gesture with his hand discreetly. Ramon stared at the Prince of Constellation, as if he could not figure him out. What is he doing? Thales rubbed his temple while he smiled and stared at Ramon. He then slowly opened his mouth and spoke. Willow says you are from the capital. Eternal Star City, was it? I once flipped through the doctor's name list in the town hall, but why have I never heard of your name? Poutre furrowed his brows as he stood by the side. Ever since the prince was recognized by the public, he had stayed in Mindy's hall all along. When did he ever go to the town hall? And to flip through the name list of the doctors? My God, the entire capital including the neighboring territories and the suburbs have more than hundreds of doctors with varying levels of skill and reputation. Ramon smiled awkwardly. Oh, I only help and treat a handful of poor people and receive a scanty pay, so, I am probably not in the list. Thales frowned slightly and then immediately broke into a smile. Poor people, is that right? The second prince replied bluntly, then I guess the place you are working in is probably Lower City District. He continued to stare at Ramon while he rubbed his finger against his temple. Ramon nodded in a stiff manner. Ah, yes, many poor people live there. I once went to the Lower City 2nd District too. The second prince did not let him continue. Thales exhaled lightly. I have also heard that the place is Black Street Brotherhood's territory. Without him realizing, Ramon stopped breathing. Even though it is inappropriate to talk about this in front of you, gang activities do indeed run rampant in Lower City District. Ramon stared vigilantly at his surroundings, but he did not realize that he was already subconsciously replying to all of Thales' questions. Thales exercised his fingers gently and stared at Ramon with a gaze that could someone to feel uneasy. Then do tell me, if the members of Black Street Brotherhood were injured or sick, would they also seek your treatment, dear Dr. Ramon? After he finished speaking, Thales put on a pure and genuine smile fitting of a 7-year-old boy as he stared straight at Ramon. How is it possible? We would not dare come into contact with those gang members. Ramon awkwardly changed the topic. Your Highness, pardon me for saying this, the condition of that man on the bed is not good, how about we? Ah, is that so? Thales suddenly put on a cheerful smile. But, you do not think of it this way at the bottom of your heart. Ramon was momentarily stunned. The bottom of my heart. Thales' next words made Ramon widen his eyes. It seems like you have treated many members of the Brotherhood before. Thales pressed one hand on his temple while he gestured with his other hand, making it appear as if he was trying his best to recall something. A fellow who was holding a knife. Ah, that fellow looked like he was quite ruthless, but he just did not really like to speak. Nonetheless, it was considered normal to have people like this in the gang. Raymond's expression immediately became odd. Holding a knife, ruthless, did not like to speak. A figure who matched the description appeared in his mind. But how would that little sh*t know? Thales stared at him in glee. What is his name, Lairk? It would seem like he came to you to treat his injuries frequently. Based on his appearance, was he perhaps an assassin? Raymond's expression changed abruptly. Lairk the assassin. The silent assassin of the Brotherhood's 13 generals, who treated his enemies as relentlessly as he treated himself. Ramon had treated his scary wounds, which resulted from those intense battles many times. But how does he know? Poutre and the others were looking at each other in surprise by the side. What is going on? Let me see, a bedroom decorated in black, a still life painting of fruits, and a flower vase hanging above the fireplace. Thales closed his eyes and clenched his teeth. It looked like he was trying his best to remember things. Ah, there is so much blood. A knife wound on the left shoulder. God, he was in so much pain, he almost crushed his teeth from clenching them. He was grabbing onto your collar tightly and muttering something about the venomous sting, and scorpion whip. Who is that weeping woman? She looked very beautiful. Her name is Felicia. Ramon gritted his teeth. Is he not a prince who has lived a privileged life? How does he know about the time I treated Lairk's injuries a year ago? Lairk headed off to assassinate his target, but he was ambushed by Blood Bottle Gang. Is this information from the Secret Intelligence Department? No, it is impossible. Raymond's face became ashen while his heart froze. A thought flashed across his mind. He even clearly knows about the details of the Blackstreet's headquarters and Lairk's room, which I have almost forgotten. And the weeping Felicia at the side. Do not stop, Doctor. Thales continued to rub his temple and opened his eyes. He was smiling when he said, do recall quickly, which member of the Brotherhood have you treated before? Were there any members who were of higher ranks? Quickly, try to remember them. Ah, that's the spirit. Brotherhood, higher ranks. Ramon discovered that he was starting to tremble slightly. A fat person, what did you call him? Morris. Why did he always like to meet you at the back door of a pub? He brought along an ugly dog at first and he was always beaming. Was he very familiar with you? It was as if Ramon had suddenly fallen into an ice hole. Morris of the 6 powerhouses. My liaison regarding that matter was indeed Morris. The secret meeting spot was at the back alley of Sunset Pub. But how is this possible? Morris would ensure the safety of the place every single time. Unless. He did not want to think about that possibility. Ramon tried his utmost to clear his thoughts, yet he could not help but remember those things in his memory after listening to Thales' words. Let us look at some pretty interesting memories. Memories. This is a person with a huge build. Thales grinned while he slowly said, he looks quite fierce and he is not really attractive. His temper is also pretty bad. He was actually injured at the groin. Poor thing, I am referring to you, doctor. You even had to treat his injuries. Oh, it was because his father was very fierce, right? Ramon put on an expression that revealed his utmost disbelief as he looked at the mysterious second prince. He even knows about this. Remember quickly, what was his name? Oh, Rhoda. Thales chuckled and said, is he considered the most troublesome patient you have ever encountered? Quite Rhoda. The confusion on Putre, Wya and the others' faces became even deeper. Ramon opened his mouth instinctively. His palms were already wet with sweat. Quide, Rhoda's son. I was indeed the one who went to examine and treat his injuries. But only the cadres of the Brotherhood's top brass would know about this. This was a top-secret matter. How does the prince know about this? Ramon was stupefied while he stared at Thales. Thales sighed and unfurled his right fist. He stared at Ramon and put on a cold smile. Do not be surprised, this is my psionic ability. Yes, Dr. Ramon. The next moment, Thales was smiling when he said a simple but effective sentence to the stunned Ramon. I can read minds. Ramon was dumbstruck. As he stared at Thales, his mind went blank. Thales continued to smile brilliantly. I can read all of thy thoughts. Read minds. Putre, along with Wya and Ralph, all had their mouths wide open when they stared at the second prince in a daze. On the other hand, Ida tightly furrowed her brows and stared at the back of Thales' head. Read minds. Raymond's face reflected his internal struggles while his expression revealed his utmost disbelief. No. Even in the Soul Tower's notes, reading minds is the most untouchable field. Yet, he is obviously only 7 or 8 years old, and he already has such. No. The Brotherhood's strange doctor shook his head instinctively. Thales turned his head around and looked at Putre, Wya, Ralph and the other people in the barracks. Their expressions showed that they were in shock. However, Ida, who was standing at the side, crossed her arms over her chest and had a skeptical look on her face. Please keep this a secret on my behalf. Thales showed them a brilliant smile. He did not want anyone else to know when he trained me to use this power. But I trust all of you. Trained, you? Putre asked in disbelief. Who? Who else could it be? Thales laughed cheerfully and turned his head around. He looked at Ramon, whose face was filled with fear, and he said the name in a cheerful and relaxed manner, Morat Hansen. Silence. Everyone in the room stared at Thales in dismay as if he was some sort of monster. Ramon was even more dumbstruck when he looked at Thales. Morat Hansen. He knew the meaning of this name. Lance's teacher. Constellation's nightmare over the past 50 years. The Viper in the Dark Night. The chief of the Secret Intelligence Department. No way. The new Prince of Constellation is the Black Prophet student. Of course, this was just a gamble in Thales' heart. Morat was even more skilled when he used this so-called power. After all, he could detect that the other person was lying to aid in his next line of questioning. But luckily, the bargaining chip he had in his hands was not too bad. Everyone in the barracks came to a realization. But, you never said, Putre furrowed his brows. Who would have thought you would follow the Black Prophet? Ah, Thales sighed lightly. You know, after all, a psionic ability like mine is far too rare. Let us get straight to the point. Thales became the friendly 7-year-old boy once again. He rubbed his temples and smiled as he said, Come, carefully think about your real identity, Dr. Ramon. You would not mind letting me know about it, correct? Ramon was trembling a little and staring blankly at the ground. My identity? No. My identity. That will expose the Brotherhood, will expose that person. No. I must not think of it. I must not think of it. Right, so this is your identity. Thales rubbed his fingers against his temple and stared at the nervous, absent-minded Ramon. Thales then gave him a victorious smile. No wonder I did not remember your name even after I read through the name list. Thales narrowed his eyes. So, you are not only the secret back-alley doctor who provides medical treatment to those in the Brotherhood, you are also a member of the Black Street Brotherhood who is nicknamed the Strange Doctor. Corbibi Srka Ramon. Raymond's hands hung limp by his side, and he did not realize it. My full name. Thales put down his finger and concluded. I only know about this much, Thales secretly said to himself. Hopefully this is useful enough. No attention would be given to a child beggar, who had his life under his strict control. He had to beg persistently for ample food and means to live every day throughout the 4 years he lived in the Brotherhood. Thus, Thales, who was once a child beggar, could always learn about many secrets in the Brotherhood without attracting much attention from other people. For example, he could enter the dog hole with his weak, scrawny body and overhear the fight between Laerk and Felicia's fairies. Ahem, he was trying to discover secrets in their room, since Laerk's room was at the corner of the big house, which happened to also be the outermost room. Another example would be him waiting and observing the back alley of Sunset Pub. Once he confirmed that there were no individuals inside, such as Morris and his angry wolfhound, he would sneak into the pub and rummage through their garbage for that day. Of course, the thing he paid attention to the most was the strange doctor with his strange and unique features right before his eyes. Strange Dr. Ramon. He did not appear many times in the Brotherhood, and he would also cover his head every time he appeared. However, do not underestimate a child beggar's memory and ability to recognize people. In order to survive, they had to recognize every pedestrian's figure and posture to obtain a slight opportunity to continue living. Which one of them was a poor man, which one of them was a rich person, which one of them was a laborer, which one of them lived a comfortable life, which one they could steal from, which one they could only beg from, which one was impossible to get near to, not to mention, they were always greeted warmly by the thugs, also, which one was one of their own. You better get lost as far as you can when he appears, do you understand? This was what Quide said when he grabbed a poor boy's collar. The strange doctor always appeared after something big happened in the Brotherhood. When he arrived, he smelled like medication, but when he left, he smelled like blood. It was obvious that he was treating those who were injured. There was a day when Thales went back late because he had just finished digging the secret tunnel. Thales lay on his stomach by the roadside and saw Laerk being carried back. Thales saw the scary wound on his shoulder. It would not stop bleeding. The figure who appeared after that was Ramon. The child beggar Thales remembered this figure ever since. Thales, who was now a prince, could also remember this figure. As for Quide, who was a heavy drinker, this name had now become a very distant memory, to the extent that Thales had almost forgotten about him, would go for body checks regularly. However, he always had the unique medicinal smell of that strange doctor every time he returned. Each time after Quide came back from his checkup, he would be enraged and drink excessively. When he was abusing and beating up the child beggars, he would mention the strange doctor's full name occasionally. Corbibsrka Ramon. Thales buried the memories of the past deep within his brain. It was such a shame that this mysterious mind-reading was only useful on Ramon. Ramon was drenched in cold sweat. But then, he sighed in relief. Fortunately, he has not declared my true identity. That deadly secret. Wait. Thales observed Raymond's expression and shook his head. It seems like your identity is not that simple. That is certain, Thales silently thought to himself, I only know Raymond's name and nickname. However, how can the identity of a fellow who enters and exits the Brotherhood and also one who meets up with the top brass frequently be some simple doctor? Could it be that you have other secrets? He asked faintly. Thales stared at him with a deep gaze. The 7-year-old boy slowly lifted his finger. Come on, think carefully about it. Ramon started to tremble uncontrollably. The scenario was somewhat strange. An old man was shivering before a crazy boy. Other secrets? No. No. Ramon was alarmed and terrified when he yelled. He did not dare look at Thales' gaze and lowered his head in fear. Please, stop. Thales narrowed his eyes. Do not be too surprised, I have seen many people with expressions like yours. Thales stretched his arms over his head. Thales exercised his neck and whispered in satisfaction, from criminals to the king. Ramon bit his lip in anguish. Thales fixed his eyes on Ramon. To be honest, I am the Prince of Constellation, the only heir of this country, but you are just a gangster. I am not interested in you at all. I also do not care about your secret. But when it comes to matters that involve me, he continued faintly, so, before I tear your clumsy lies apart and dig out all your dirty little secrets from your brain, Dr. Ramon, do tell me why you insist on following us to the north. So that I do not have to dig some other boring facts from your brain again. Ramon was startled. Yes. And all those secrets. I understand, Your Highness, Ramon replied in anguish, I will come clean with my aim. Thank you for your cooperation. After all, it is not easy to use this mind-reading ability, I can only maintain it for a short period of time. Thales sighed and put down his right hand. He smiled in a cunning manner and said, I will have to wait until tomorrow before I can use it again. Ramon trembled slightly again. Oh, and also, you can begin with your treatment. Thales pointed at Cora with a smile on his face. We have already wasted quite some time. Ramon lowered his head dejectedly. In contrast, the others were staring at their prince with different expressions on their faces. It was as if they were meeting him for the first time. Blood Bottle Gang, Nikolai and Catherine. Thales furrowed his brows. Behind him, Ralph shuddered instinctively. Catherine. Big sister. Yes, I am hiding from them. Raymond's expression was profound and mysterious. He was holding a bottle of medicine, scissors and bandages while he was treating Cora's injuries. He glanced at Thales every now and then with dread flashing in his eyes. Of course, you have never heard of these people's names. An idea then blossomed in Thales' heart. The big and burly Nikolai dressed in red and his fight with Istrone in Vine Manor appeared in his mind. I was chased by them for 6 or 7 days and I just hid myself in the fortress, but it is only a matter of time before they discover my position. As long as they guard the outskirts, they will still be able to catch me in the end. Additionally, Exted and Constellation are on the verge of war. If I run into any army from either side when I am alone in the field, the ending will not be any better than falling into Blood Bottle Gang's hands. Thales muttered, so, when we arrived here and searched for a doctor, you suddenly had a thought, and hoped to leave Broken Dragon Fortress with our protection. And you will leave after we arrive in Exted. Ramon nodded bitterly. This is very suspicious. Thales thought to himself. Why would a secret doctor who sought a living in the capital come to the border of 2 countries? There was a member who was injured at the border, Ramon said quietly. He did not dare to even look at Thales. I came over to treat him, but I was discovered by the Blood Bottle Gang. This is not right, Thales speculated in his heart. Is a gang doctor only in charge of healing really so important to the extent that Blood Bottle Gang would dispatch their troops recklessly and pursue him vigorously for 6 or 7 days consecutively? There are some other secrets. It is a shame that I have just told him that my mind-reading ability can only be used again tomorrow. Otherwise, I can still scare him. Thales nodded and said, continue with your treatment. Since you are so honest, maybe I will reconsider your request. Ramon nodded dejectedly. Thales exhaled and leapt down from the chair, but he suddenly felt that his legs were numb. Fortunately, he did not fall down thanks to WYA and Ralph's support. This is bad, I sat down too long, all for the sake of acting just now. Thales stood up strenuously. Luckily, that fluctuation that appeared after he last died, automatically surged in his body again and eased his numbness. Right, Thales hit his leg, feeling worried. This fluctuation and strength are the source of troubles. Whenever I feel it, it strengthens my state in an instant, but it's just to a small extent, just enough for me to cut a rope. Also, what exactly is it? Thales thought worriedly. The vision that seemed like some sort of thermal radiation detector seems like it is actually very cool. Thales thought about this matter while he directed the fluctuation to flow to the area around his eyes. That special vision was once again activated. He turned his head over and saw a bright light shining from the body of each person. Ida had a glaring white light, WYA was radiating in a penetrating, gray light, Poutre was covered in a gentle and mild purple light, whereas Ralph had a faint, green light on him that shone without end. Are these different abilities, signs of vitality, or the attributes of their energies? Thales curiously experimented with his vision. He turned to look around the barracks. The next moment, Thales was stunned. With the vision provided by the fluctuations, he saw the most unbelievable scene. Cora's bright light was sometimes bright and sometimes dark, like a waning light that could extinguish at any moment. But Ramon did not have any glaring, bright light on him. He was shining in flashes of a strange, dark-colored fluctuation that resonated with his surroundings. Yet that was not what surprised Thales. Ramon could be seen pressing lightly against Cora's wound. Rays of vibrating light particles slid through Cora's wound and gathered in Raymond's hands. Those light particles permeated Cora's scary, festering wounds one after another. Every time some particles seeped through, the bright light on Cora's body became slightly more stable and brighter. Like a dying patient who was slowly recovering. Thales stared at Ramon while he was in a daze. Other people may not have been able to see this clearly due to the light. But with the vision that was provided to him by the fluctuation, Thales was able to see clearly that the strange doctor's lips were visibly trembling while he remained in a dark corner of the barracks. It seemed like his mouth was repeating something. Those light particles that seeped through Cora's body would rhythmically pass through Raymond's hands and then return to his body to complete a cycle. During the whole entire time, Ramon chanted repeatedly in a rhythmic manner. Thales furrowed his brows tightly together. This is absolutely not medical expertise, he told himself with certainty. Absolutely not. Chapter 102 Extit's Welcoming Ceremony. 3 days after the second prince arrived at the Broken Dragon Fortress. The envoy that was sent to Lampard's military camp has returned. Commander Sonia Caesar stood on the fortress city wall with a solemn expression on her face as she stared ahead. Chapman replied, he says he is waiting calmly for the prince's arrival. I am afraid that you will have to start your journey to the north today. Thales was leaning against the observation window on the city wall. He stared at the wide, snow-colored prairie towards the north. He could vaguely see the continuous stretch of a wide military camp and the Iron Fist flag that represented Black Sand Region's Lampard family in his field of vision. He could also roughly see the distant smoke, ascending from some military camps, which were hidden away from his vision field. They brought tens upon thousands of people to await my arrival. Thales sighed, I did not expect myself to be so popular. The fortress flower turned around and said to Thales, Chapman Lampard is Extit's Archduke. His territory is right next to Constellation. After Extit's diplomat group was attacked by the assassin, he immediately mobilized Black Sand region's vassals and gathered over 10,000 soldiers to form an army. All this within a few days' time, and he pressed in on the border. They have already been stationed there for 2 weeks. At first, they were only observing and intimidating us, but in the past 3 days, Lampard started to send out small troops to purge the main roads around the perimeter. He even looted 2 villages and fought against our patrols. We have no choice but to minimize our area of patrol. Thales could feel a bone-chilling coldness as he rubbed his palms together and blew a puff of warm air. I have already arrived at the fortress. The Jadastar's 9-pointed star flag has also risen. Why is he not withdrawing his army? It is obvious that he does not have any excuse to invade Constellation anymore. Behind Thales, Poutre raised his eyebrow. Based on the unique life Chapman Lampard has led, he is a standard gambler. One of the characteristics of a gambler is that even if he has lost so much that he is forced to leave, he is still not willing to do so. He will not turn around even until the very last moment. So, my arrival has no effect on this gambler. Thales snorted and laughed. Even if he is guaranteed to lose, he still wants to lay a bet. Not necessarily, Poutre replied in a serious manner. What we were most worried about initially was the other 2 archdukes, whose territories are also right next to Constellation. We were worried that Reform Towers Trendita and Prestige Orchids Olsius would both send out their armies. Then, the 3 archdukes and many more of Extit's vassals will combine their military forces to oppress those who share a mutually supportive relationship with the fortress, like the Lonely Old Tower, Watchtower as well as Cold Castle. And, they will disregard the costs and attack the isolated Broken Dragon fortress when the others are unable to help the fortress. Whether it is about physical strength or quality, Extit's soldiers adapt even better in this freezing, cold winter compared to our reinforcements that are heading up north. Sonia continued with Poutre's point. If they seize this place, they only have to wait calmly for the day before the bitter cold winter to pass and for the beginning of spring next year to arrive, and it will be their time to use the fortress as their military base to go down south on a large scale, just like what happened 12 years ago. Poutre nodded. But following your diplomatic trip up north, those 2 archdukes have yet to appear till this day. This means that we have already finished half of our diplomatic mission. In the approaching day before the bitter cold winter, Archduke Lampard cannot depend on his own forces, which is made up of 10,000 people. So he has to take down the fortress before his supplies run out. He has already lost, Poutre said faintly. In this case, I am afraid that it is up to me to finish the other half of our diplomatic mission. I have to completely eliminate the threat of war between the 2 countries personally before King Nuvan, right? Thales shrugged helplessly. Firstly, I have to pass through Archduke Lampard's military camp, but inside the camp, there are more than 10,000 physically strong northern men, who are full of energy. They have nowhere to let this energy out and they are waiting for me. Poutre shook his head. Lampard does not dare jeopardize your safety. Attacking the fortress to conquer the northern territory is a completely different thing from conspiring to murder the heir and confronting Constellation. Lampard may not be daring enough to do that, but I am afraid that his opponents would be happy to see this sort of thing. We still have to be careful. Sonia gave them a hearty smile. Uraka will bring his Fury Guards to escort you to the entrance of Lampard's military camp. Uraka, Thales recalled the aggressive and dangerous man, along with his scornful gaze when he looked at Thales. Thales shook his head. Are you sure that he is willing to do that? Sonia snorted coldly. I do not deny that I really dislike him, but on the battlefield, he is indeed the person who has fought hand-to-hand against Extichans the most. Also, he insisted on this. I originally wanted to let Miranda. Thales could not help his feeling of astonishment. He insisted on escorting me. He started to recall the man's appearance, Uraka Merk. It is such a familiar name. I must have heard it somewhere before. Right at this moment, a swordswoman with black hair slowly walked up to the city wall. Her hand, clad in a black glove, was placed upon her left chest as she bowed before Sonia. Her face was devoid of any emotions. The troops for Diplomat Group are already prepared. Please send the prince's subordinates to make the final confirmation. Even though the swordswoman had addressed the prince in her speech, she did not spare a glance at Thales' direction from start to finish. She did not bow before him either. All right, Sonia nodded. Shen then turned to look at Thales and Poutre. Poutre, who was standing by the side, sighed. I will go with you, Miss Arund. Thales was stunned again. Arund. The swordswoman, Miranda Arund nodded in stiffly and walked down along the city wall with Poutre. She still did not look at Thales. Do not take any offense. Sonia smiled faintly. Miranda is Duke Arund's only daughter. Her father has been imprisoned in the capital and the family is humiliated. It is very normal for her to hold a grudge against you in her heart. Oh, Thales nodded awkwardly and said, I think I heard Wya mentioning that the fortress has an extremely well-known swordswoman of eradication. I also heard that she is the Tower of Eradication say. The seed. Sonia stared at Miranda's back and sighed. The Tower of Eradication stored a great amount of various fighting techniques and ways to inherit the power of eradication before the Battle of Eradication. The most information stored is on sword styles. Its scions are still continuously researching and developing new sword styles, techniques as well as the power of eradication itself. This is to nurture the generation after the generation of people who can control the power of eradication among us. Only very few people, who are the most outstanding students, get the title of Seed. Miranda is one of them. They are people who have the hope to shoulder the power of eradication's legacy, and they are able to shoulder the power of eradication's mission as well. Thales stared at Sonia while he furrowed his brows slightly. Power of eradication. The extraordinary power resulting from humans awakening to their power on their own. This is another piece of information that is worthy of my attention. Is it related to the fluctuations? Sonia did not know what Thales was thinking about as she continued to say helplessly, but even so, Miranda has still been in a very difficult situation recently. After Duke Arund was imprisoned, the Northern Territory was managed by a few vassals that her father trusted the most, and they are waiting for her to go back after this crisis ends, but Arund's few cousin brothers and nephews are coveting the Duke of the Northern Territory's right of inheritance. Fortunately, even though Val Arund has been sent to prison, he is still the Duke of the Northern Territory. His Majesty did not sentence him with the crime of treason and did not strip him of his title or territory. The king only accused him of conspiring with foreign political leaders. It is a slightly comforting thought. Sonia let out a deep sigh and said, "It's just that, I never thought that he would do something like this. You know, in the past, Val had constantly served as Broken Dragon Fortress backup for more than 10 years. He is a coward." At that very moment, a deep voice, which would have made anyone feel uneasy, came from a distance. Compared to his heroic brothers, Val Arund is a complete coward, and he has humiliated his blood brothers. They did their utmost to protect Prince Horace and stood their ground. Uraka Merk's figure could be seen slowly walking up the city wall. He had an impatient expression on his face. In comparison, 12 years ago, that Duke Val was scared out of his wits by those extant bastards. I am surprised that he still believes in trash like Lampod. If you want me to tell the truth, the only good thing he has done was killing that extant prince. At least this time, you said it after Miranda left. Sonia pressed her hand onto her forehead and sighed. Should I be grateful for your consideration and care for her feelings? Her feelings? Uraka snorted coldly. Do I look like a person who would consider this? Thales rolled his eyes secretly. This fellow, why does he always look like somebody owes him money? Sonia snorted lightly. What is wrong with you now? Uraka gave her a disdainful look. I am here to find this little brat. Uraka directed his fierce gaze towards Thales and made the latter slightly nervous. The 300 members of the Fury Guards are ready. If you really want to go to Exted and seek death, at least do not make me wait for too long. It looks like you are not too satisfied with my trip up north, Baron Merk, Thales could not help but ask. In that case, why do you still want to send me to Lampard's military camp? Sonia exhaled. Uraka stared intently at Thales, and the latter could not help but feel a little apprehensive. Because I owe Jadastar a favor. He only spoke after a long while, and you annoying, dawdling little brat, you just happen to have Jadastar as your last name. After he finished talking, Uraka turned around and left without looking back. We are going to depart in the afternoon. Do not dawdle. Thales and Sonia looked at Uraka's figure as he walked further away. Do not misunderstand, Sonia said to Thales sarcastically, that is his unique way of saying, how are you? You know, Uraka is quite shy. Shy? Thales just had to stick out his tongue. Is it because of different ideals? Thales suddenly asked. Sonia gave him a puzzled look. The dispute and discord between the both of you does not seem to come from some specific hatred, Thales pondered while he spoke softly. Also, what you mentioned before about him and my uncle, Prince Horace, Thales hesitated for a while but continued to say, even though he seems quite annoying, Uraka does not look like someone who would stab you in the back. Sonia kept quiet for a second. Those were indeed angry words. Sonia smiled bitterly. Uraka was the one who brought the remaining military forces and broke into Exted's tight encirclement. He bathed in blood all the way to seize back the remains of Prince Horace that year. Before the Fortress Treaty, Starlight Brigade headed north to meet with the few remaining soldiers left in the kingdom. They fought ferociously in 3 battles with Exted in the Northern Territory, Land of Cliffs region and Central Territory without caring about the number of casualties. We lost a large number of men, and the other party also had a huge number of casualties. I saw the almost crazed Uraka, his force and his destructive power on the battlefield with my own eyes. Even Exted's pride, the Doppelsoldners were incessantly wary of him. I think this was the reason why Exted was willing to finally sit down and negotiate. Thales was startled. That man with the impatient look on his face is actually. As for ideals, you are right. Sonia sighed. John, your father's uncle, his principles of war for the Starlight Brigade were sensibility and cautiousness, doing your best to protect yourself, being flexible towards changes and movements, as well as waiting for an opportunity to attack. However, Prince Horace's army was known for its merciless command and ruthlessly strict military rules. Under his army, Uraka became used to fighting tough and bloody battles. Because of the large number of casualties, Uraraka's army always has huge batches of new soldiers, but he only keeps the tough ones who can endure and carry blood and death on their shoulders. Sonia shook her head. I do not understand why His Majesty wants to place the two of us together. We cannot even reach an agreement on whether to go forward or retreat on the battlefield. Maybe, this is part of the king's plan, Thales suddenly said. Under Sonia's puzzled gaze, Thales lifted his head. A main general with both sensibility and cautiousness is needed to defend the fortress in the long term. However, when Extit's army presses upon the border, a person who can directly fight a tough war is needed. Sonia raised her head and glanced at him. Perhaps, Sonia chuckled. They were right, you really do not seem like a regular child. There really is a reason that the king to choose you for the mission up north. Ahem. Thales scratched his head awkwardly and tried to change the subject. Right, why is Uraraka not that famous when he has such splendid military successes? Sonia was thoroughly stunned. Not that famous. Sonia widened her eyes. She looked at him with an expression that said, how is that possible? Thales narrowed his eyes in confusion. No, Sonia came to a realization and shook her head as she smiled. You must know him, even though you do not know his real name. Under Thales' confused gaze, Sonia lifted her head and looked at Extit's military camp in the distance. Her eyes shone brightly. From the beggars to the king, every single constellation knows him. Or at least, they know about his nickname. Thales widened his eyes in astonishment. Everyone knows it. In that instant, he knew who Uraraka Merc was. With Raymond's treatment, Korra's condition became stable, but it was obvious that he could not follow them on their journey up north. Yes, we need to fill in the spot for attendance. Kutre was walking beside Thales, who had already finished packing up. Following them were Wya, who was wrapped in bandages, Ralph, whose arm was fastened with splints, and Ida, who was still extremely dispirited because of the cold. At least, there are some advantages. The people who are joining us are all experienced veterans who have been on the battlefield. They are not Jadastar's private soldiers from the manor, who only went through training that focused on one-on-one wrestling and protecting someone. Thales looked at the 30 veterans who stood before him in a stern manner. They all had resolute gazes in their eyes. They were armed with different weapons, which consisted of swords, shields, bows, pikes and axes. The former Duke's personal guard of Starlight Brigade, Gennard, stood right in front of the group. Thales was left a little stupefied by the situation. Kutre continued and said, thanks to your trial under the scaffold, many veterans were willing to join our diplomat group, even though many people still think our journey is extremely dangerous. They walked to the last row of soldiers when a young man with black hair, who was holding a pair of pikes in his hands, waved happily at him. Thales furrowed his brows. Veteran. He insisted on coming along. Kutre stared at Willow Ken, whose expression was bright and cheerful. He then spread his hands. However, there are only 29 veterans who volunteered. The others are new soldiers. If I have to make it 30 people, at least this new soldier who received your grace is slightly more reliable. Thales gave Willow a smile. At least they gave him a pair of new weapons. Kutre shrugged. There are many broken pikes in the storeroom. It is not a hard thing to pair a pair of shorter pikes. But that suspicious doctor, do you really want to bring him along? Kutre turned his around and looked at Ramon, pursing his lips and shaking his head. I thought you learned your lesson from the Duke of Iris Flowers. Ramon was shivering among the soldiers when he lifted his head and coincidentally noticed Thales' gaze. He was slightly shocked and immediately lowered his head. Do not worry, I have already asked him about his origins and made an agreement with him as well. Thales stared at Ramon with a complicated gaze. Moreover, he did indeed save Korra's life. Strange doctor. That power he had in his hands. If I am guessing correctly, that is. I need to find out more about it. Sonia walked over from a distance away, followed by a chilly-looking Miranda. Your Highness, if you do not have any further questions, according to the time we set, it is time to go. Uraraka has already chosen 300 sword and shield troops from the group of Fury Guards. The fortress flower crouched down and patted Thales on his shoulder. Only this time, the strength of her hand was slightly stronger. Sorry, the number of people cannot increase anymore. There are only 3,000 people in the fortress. Nevertheless, those soldiers that Uraraka has chosen are veterans. With her chin, she gestured towards a lightly geared man standing in a distance. He was carrying a bow across his back and was growing visibly impatient. They will escort you all the way to the borderline. Thales exhaled, and his breath turned into a puff of white fog. He stomped on the snow, which belonged to Constellation. He lifted his head and silently said, of course. Sonia nodded. Constellation's second prince gave the crowd an effortless smile. Let us depart. Follow me to increase your knowledge about the Dragon's Kingdom. Hence, the double cross-shaped star's flag, which represented Constellation and Jadastar family's 9-pointed star flag, were erected at the same time. Wya mounted a Northland horse with wide hoofs. It was a breed of horse unique to the north. He then pulled Thales up the saddle. I swear on my life that I will properly hold the reins, Your Highness, Wya said solemnly. Please do not worry about your safety. Thales nodded naturally. Then, I will let you handle this, attendant. He had already gotten used to Yaya's excessive attitude. Meanwhile, Poutre and the few remaining Jadastar private soldiers, who had gone through horse riding training, rode on the remaining horses. It was obvious that Ralph could not ride a horse with his current condition, and for some unknown reason Ida shook her head all of a sudden when she saw a horse. Uraka rode his horse towards Thales' side and the sword and shield troops followed him with a stern expression on their faces. Do not be scared and wet your pants, little brat, Uraka said coldly. I heard the people on duty above saying that Extit has prepared a welcoming ceremony for us. Ah. Thales was momentarily stunned. Before he came back to his senses, he heard Uraka yell in the direction of the gate's chains. Open the gate. Broken Dragon Fortress North Gate slowly ascended while the sound of chains rubbing against metal rose into the air. Thales took a deep breath and slowly made his way out of the Broken Dragon Fortress. He was followed by Constellation's diplomat group, which consisted of less than 40 people, and the escort guards, which consisted of more than 300 people. They then headed north. First, they had to pass through the 5 castles, north of Broken Dragon Fortress. The soldiers ahead had already strung their bows, and were ready for battle. But soon, Thales understood what Uraka meant by welcoming ceremony. Many people suddenly appeared across the endless white, snow-covered ground before his eyes. Perhaps he should rephrase that as Extit's army. 6 troops of infantrymen lined up into 2 slightly curved lines and scattered to both sides of the road ahead of them. Poutre narrowed his pupils. The number of infantrymen in each troop is almost 400. This also meant that there were almost 2,000 Extit infantrymen waiting for them to head north. The people of the diplomat group became instinctively nervous. Wya held onto his reins even tighter. This is our welcoming ceremony. Thales stared at the battle formation ahead, which was not really far away from him with a gloomy expression on his face. They really did cross over the border. He turned his head back and glanced at the fortress. He could vaguely see Sonia's figure. Prepare for battle. Uraka, who was riding ahead, turned his head around and said to his soldiers in a deep voice, do not let your guard down. Maybe this is a demonstration, Poutre said as he furrowed his brows, but it is not necessary for them to make a formation in front of the fortress. It will still have the same effect as when we enter the Extit military camp. I have a bad feeling about this, Thales said with a pale complexion on his face. So, do you want to retreat, young prince? Uraka said sarcastically, there is still time for you to turn around now. Stop joking around. Thales closed his eyes and exhaled, after which he opened them. Let us continue onwards. Do not worry, Poutre said with a low voice, Lampad is not stupid enough to kill Constellation's prince and heir, who is on a diplomatic mission under the watchful gaze of those at the border of the 2 kingdoms. As long as we do not do anything to provoke them and give them an excuse. They moved forward slowly until they entered the premise of the formation, which was in the shape of a mountain. They did not mention anything like this. Ramon nervously nudged a soldier with black hair beside him. Nothing will happen to the diplomat group, right? Huh. Willow Ken was taken aback for a moment but he immediately returned to his senses and patted Raymond's shoulder with a smile on his face. Do not worry, I have met them before. Extit soldiers are quite nice. Quite nice. Ramon was stunned, but what Willow said next made him go pale. If they want to kill you, their swords are very sharp. They will not dawdle too, so you will not suffer. At that very moment, all 6 troops of infantrymen began to move slowly. The members of the diplomat group instantly became nervous. But luckily, Extit soldiers did not walk towards them. The first 2 Extit troops plodded forward and almost brushed past the diplomat group on both their left and right sides. Thales could even see the Northland soldiers' beard and yellow teeth. They looked brutish and violent. These burly soldiers were armed with huge hatchets or gigantic, spiked maces. They also turned around and looked at Constellation's diplomat group with a hostile expression on their faces. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of heavy footsteps on the snow-covered ground rang out in a disorderly fashion. However, the atmosphere caused by more than 2,000 people from all directions made these concentrated sounds of footsteps more impactful. They walked past the diplomat group on both sides. And Thales' expression became stern. It was his first time facing a battle array made up of a few thousand people and he was feeling a little alarmed. Nonetheless, he was not the only one who felt the same way. Even the sword and shield troops from the Fury Guards could not help but feel anxious. Thud, thud, thud. Keep your composure, Uraka said in a deep voice. Thales, who was feeling apprehensive, tried to calm himself down, so he turned around and got a good look at the Northland soldiers on either side. From their armor, weapons, movements, to their advancement, Extit's infantrymen were obviously not as uniformed and orderly as Constellation. There were some soldiers who held axes and wore chain armor. There were also some soldiers who held single-handed swords and only wore chest plates. There were even some blade and shield soldiers who resembled Constellation's sword and shield troops, but Thales could obviously feel that these infantrymen were different from Constellation's. They all had one similarity. Their gazes were hostile, their expressions were fierce, they had an aggressive and threatening presence, and their faces were filled with contempt as well as disdain. These infantrymen were holding flags with the picture of an iron fist, the symbol of the Lampard family. However, they occasionally stroked, pounded, and swung their weapons as if they were demonstrating. They were ferocious like beasts that could go wild at any moment. Thud, thud, thud. This is not right, Thales secretly told himself. If this is a demonstration, they are all light infantrymen, at least according to Northlander standards. Extit's famous doppelsoldners and heavy-armored axemen as well as the Northland heavy cavaliers are not here, not even the light cavaliers, Putre pondered and said softly. If these troops had been the ones I mentioned just now, it would be too simple for them to kill us, what with them being at the back now, as they are light infantrymen, they are probably just demonstrating. Then, why did they not send those powerful armed forces to demonstrate? Thales furrowed his brows tightly and asked, a troop of doppelsoldners walking around with an astonishing presence beside us, surely, the effect would be even better. Putre also furrowed his brows. This is indeed strange. Thud, thud, thud. Do not let down your guard. Baraka Merc's voice could be heard again. Even though there are only more than 2,000 light infantrymen, if they swarm at us, they can chop us into pieces in just half an hour. Baraka tightened the silver-black, metal bow across his back and turned around to speak to them coldly. On the battlefield with thousands of men and horses, without any support and protection, even a supreme-class elite cannot hang on for more than 8 minutes. However, right at the very next second, the situation completely changed. The 6 troops of Extit were moving slowly. After the first 2 troops passed by, they suddenly turned around under their military officers' commands and merged with the other party. Thud, thud, thud. The disorderly sounds of 2,000 footsteps continued to rise into the air. Extit's light infantrymen surrounded them and slowly changed their formation from 2 curved lines, which formed a mountain into a square. They are surrounding us, Wya yelled in anger. What is the meaning of this? Putre stared at the Extitians before his eyes in shock. In his disbelief, Thales stared into the distance, wanting to see what was happening in front clearly. This should not be happening. Stop, Baraka roared angrily and had the entire diplomat group as well as the escort group come to a halt. Form your formation in your place. Even though they were nervous and apprehensive, more than 300 Constellation soldiers, especially the veterans, still stopped in their tracks. They proceeded to turn around in an orderly manner. They formed their shields into a wall and surrounded the prince in a circular formation. It is already impossible to break through their formation now. Baraka stared at the surrounding citizens of Extit in agitation. These bastards. The Constellations stared at the surrounding, murderous Extit infantrymen in bewilderment and fear. What are we going to do now? Wya clenched his teeth and asked. Do they have anyone that we can communicate with? A military officer or a commander? Thales asked nervously. Due to Lampard's best interests, they will not dare to kill me. But at the next moment, a few unfamiliar but forceful commands could be heard coming from Extit's battle formation. Baraka and Putre's expression quickly changed. So did many of the veterans. They recognized the type of military order from Extit. Within the next second, all 6 troops with over 2,000 Extit infantrymen raised their weapons and roared angrily. Woo, 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 asterisk. Thales was terrified of the deafening roars. What is happening to them? Shortly after, Extit's infantrymen could be seen walking in huge strides with a ferocious look on their faces. Thud, 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 asterisk. Sounds of footsteps that were louder than before came through like thunder. More than 2,000 infantrymen raised their weapons and rushed madly towards Thales' diplomat group from all 6 directions. Kill them. Extit's light infantrymen were roaring in fervent ardor and charging towards them. Thales was in a daze as he stared at everything before his eyes. Did they not say that Lampard would not dare to jeopardize my safety? He is waiting calmly for the prince's arrival. Then, why? Why does he want to kill me? Damn it! Putre widened his eyes in shock as he drew a half-sword from his waist. How could they? A louder roar exploded in the air and cut off Putre's speech. Enemy assault. In the center of the group, Baraka Mercs was livid and filled with rage. He controlled his unstable steed and forcefully pulled out a menacing 2-handed sword. He roared at Constellation's escort team, his Fury Guards. Get ready for battle. Chapter 103 Gamble 1. Frightening war cries shot up from more than 2,000 Extitians' throats. They charged towards the Constellations, who were like a lonely boat caught in a raging ocean. Thales' first experience of a large-scale battle came while he completely did not expect it. The sword and shield troops of the Fury Guards were at the front line. They used the long swords in their hands to shield the comrades beside them, turning their bodies to the side to form a battle formation. Baraka had already dismounted from his horse. He used his hands to raise a large, frightening sword which was almost as tall as a person. Eyes burning with the fiery desire for war, he took large strides forward. Taking the initiative on their own, the soldiers in front made room for their commander. The space was enough to fit 3 people. First charge, Baraka looked around and spoke loudly, "Hold up the defense line." The enemies charged over like flood water and closed in on them. Right in the middle of the battle array, Wya immediately pulled Thales down from the eye-catching battle steed. He placed Thales in the middle of a circle formed by 6 soldiers for firm protection. He then joined Ida, Putre and Ralph in guarding the 4 corners of this tiny battle formation. "Go and help the front line," Thales urged them. "If they collapse, you all won't be able to protect me either." However, his mind was in an extreme state of chaos. He could not fathom why he faced such a situation when making a diplomatic trip to Extit. What on earth is happening? Wya and Ralph looked at each other. After Putre nodded, they approached the front line. On the hand, Ida exhaled and spoke to Putre in a low voice, "This is a real battlefield, and even supreme-class elites must be extremely careful. And a battle with such a great disparity in strength. If you all have any ways to prevent the battle, immediately tell me. If there is none, immediately think of one." Thales gritted his teeth while watching the enemies who charged towards them from all directions, those 6 large troops of Extians. The enemies, there are too many of them. We are surrounded tightly. We don't have enough military strength at all. No, more appropriately, we did not prepare for battle at all. What should I do? Shout my identity out loud. However, those people don't seem to care about it at all. Facing the impending battle, a lot of Constellation soldiers exhaled, gripped their weapons tightly, secured their shields and looked at the fierce soldiers of Extit with a grim gaze. Roaring furiously, the first Extit infantryman charged towards them. Boom! Asterisk. His shield crashed hard against the shield of a shield and sword soldier. With the help of the comrades beside and behind him, the shield and sword soldier of Constellation gritted his teeth and endured the impact from this tall and lofty opponent. He then waved his sword to block off the opponent's axe, which swung towards him from the air. However, more Extit soldiers charged towards the Constellation diplomat group's battle array. Boom, 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 asterisk. The Extit soldiers were all howling furiously. They continuously crashed into the battle array of those from Constellation from all directions. Kill them. Hold them back. Amid the furious roars of the soldiers from both sides, the clashing of shields and the sounds of weapons meeting mingled together. It was as though thunder crackled endlessly from the ground. Gennard and 2 soldiers from the Fury Guard stood at the front line. He resisted the shield with all his might using his shoulders. A swinging spiked mace pounded hard on the shield. Gennard's entire body trembled and almost fell backwards. The comrade behind him supported his back and helped him steady his body. Gennard, whose face was distorted, vehemently resisted the impact. Damn it, he thought in pain. These Extians, they are way stronger than those rebels from the southwest, both in terms of strength and build. A sword came thrusting towards him aiming for his forearm. Gennard moved slightly and let his comrades take care of it. The veteran himself pushed the spiked mace away and kicked its owner's knees hard, making the man stagger. He then thrust his sword into the man's totally unprotected neck. Blood splattered out, his opponent fell face up while mumbling. Fortunately, they are not very agile either. Having just thought that, a long spear grazed past Gennard's ear and pierced through the stomach of a soldier on his left. Screaming, the latter crumpled onto the ground. Roaring furiously, Gennard took the position of the dead person within the battle array. He cleaved the long spear and blocked a blade that was trying to attack through the gap. A soldier behind Gennard rapidly filled in the empty space left behind. Such a scene appeared at various points of the front line. Furious roars and miserable screams were still interweaved with the clashing of metals and the striking of weapons. Extit's light infantrymen pounced again and again, as though they were fearless towards death. They were then warded off or even killed by the members of the Fury Guards and the diplomat group again and again, leaving behind many dead bodies. However, on Constellation's side, people were also falling continuously. The snow-covered ground was gradually dyed red with blood. However, the veterans from the Fury Guards at the frontline continue relying on their rich experiences and skills to forcefully maintain the frontline so that the terrified Thales would not see everything around him, where thousands of people intermingled with each other in the battlefield. Blood that splattered everywhere. Roars that can never be forgotten. Corpses that kept increasing in number. The battlefield before Thales' eyes was undoubtedly more shocking than the one with the Sacred Blood Army earlier. Commander Araka was also standing at the front line with an unpleasant expression, guarding a gap that could fit 3 people by himself. He did not show any flashy and splendid supreme-class fighting skills. Instead, he repeated the same simple and rudimentary battle moves. However, not a single person could take advantage of him. During the first charge, Araka's 2-handed great sword swerved through the air, producing a shriek of death. He swung the sword horizontally and chopped off a head. Then, using the momentum of the swing, he cleaved a second citizen of Extit's shield, chest and abdomen. Amid the splattering blood, he rapidly parried a longsword that was thrust towards him. Before his opponent could react, he thrust his large sword into his opponent's chest. However, beside him, a soldier from the Fury Guards had his skull chopped open by an axe. He fell powerlessly onto the ground. Those Extit bastards. Uraka exhaled through gritted teeth. His face was fierce and hideous. He turned and with the handle of his sword, made the enemy stagger. Observe the situation at the back, and watch out for an opportunity to break out of the encirclement and return to the fortress. While waving his sword and lowering his head to dodge an axe, Uraka, whose face was covered in blood, shouted the order. I'm afraid that it would be very hard. A military officer from the Fury Guards tried his best to block off a fierce citizen of Extit. He replied, more than half of the enemies are blocking us behind. Persist. They are only relying on the morale of having made the first charge. Gritting his teeth, Uraka kicked a shield down and thrust a sword at its owner's hideous and fierce face. He waved his left hand at the right time and used his forearm to block off a longspear. The friction produced some blood. However, at the same time, the blade of an axe swerved towards his head. Uraka steadily lowered his head to dodge it. The blade of the axe cut some of his hair. Wya, who was holding his single-edged sword, arrived. He waved his long sword, activated the edge of no return and cut open his opponent's throat with a reverse swing. However, his ribs were injured by the blade of an axe. He winced in pain. Beside Wya, a comrade had his head smashed to pieces by a hammer while trying to save Wya. Red and white substances splattered out. Don't use those silly sword styles, and cut that beautiful posture of yours out. Uraka used his sword to block off a straight blade that was swerving towards Wya. He roared loudly and furiously, in the battlefield, supreme class elites are not that much better than normal people. We just have to stand for a couple of dozen more minutes, and kill a few more meager soldiers. Every time you attack, reserve some energy and leave room for dodging. Thrust your weapon and dodge attacks without playing any tricks. An infantryman's weapon was struck out of his hand. Snarling, he tried to charge forward and tackle Uraka. Without hesitating, Uraka held his sword with one hand and punched his face. Uraka then violently elbowed him and made him retreat. The sound of his ribs cracking could vaguely be heard. Or else, retreat to the back. Don't be a burden. Wya, whose old wound had not yet healed and was injured again, could only grit his teeth and retreated in embarrassment. A strange gust of wind suddenly blew and swept up snow. A few Extit infantrymen who stepped forward to replace fallen ones could not help but raise their hands to shield their eyes. Snarling, Uraka swung his sword with both hands and cut open someone's shield and chest at the perfect time. He then thrust his sword into another person's stomach. Your psionic ability isn't bad though. Uraka wiped off the blood on his face and furrowed his brows as he looked at Ralph's single-handed hidden blade. However, can that thing even be used in the battlefield? The mute Ralph, who had one fractured arm, could not make anything out. However, he did indeed feel that his hidden blade was useless in the battlefield. Due to a lack of a knuckle guard, he faced the risk of losing his arm every time he swung his blade. He could only provide assistance with his psionic ability and only use the hidden blade to defend himself. On the other side of the formation, Willow Ken hid behind a sword and shield soldier. He blocked off a sword attack with his left hand. He then extended his right hand out of the shield and thrust his pike into the side of the opponent's face. A soldier's right hand was chopped off. Holding his shield, he gritted his teeth and stepped backwards. However, when he took the first step, a flying axe cut into his chest and stomach. Another person replaced his position. You are a doctor, at least do something, Willow shouted anxiously at Ramon, who was cowering behind him. I am not a military doctor. Ramon glanced at the enemies around them. He hugged his head and shouted, and that prince did not say that this would happen. We should have brought some pikemen along. Ida, who was guarding Thales near him, looked at the situation around her, sighed, and spoke. Her machete, which had no defensive properties at all, was only suitable for small-scale battles. Unless it hit the opponent's vital parts, it was not even enough to put a scratch in their armors. Besides, it was impossible for her to dodge to her greatest abilities in the crowded battlefield. If I had known earlier, I would have brought along Father's two-handed machete that was said to be able to break through armor. That was the standard equipment of the security guards of the ancient elf kingdom. No one predicted that there would be this battle. So far, no enemy had breached anywhere further than the second row. However, Poutre still turned his head back in worry and glanced at Thales. He shouted anxiously, this is not logical. Nothing is illogical in the battlefield. At the front of the battle array, Uraka frenziedly waved his large sword. There was another wound on his body, surviving is the only logic. Block off the first charge. There will come a time when their attack weakens. Find an opportunity to break out of the encirclement. Or else we will all exhaust ourselves to death here. Right in the middle of the battle array, Thales laid with his face down and hid among the soldiers. He breathed rapidly. His mind was in extreme confusion. Thales wanted to calm his hands, which were buried in the snow, so that they would stop shuddering. However, amid the deafening battle cries and the clashing of weapons, his forearms were like wild horses that lost control and ran wild. They ignored their owner's will and trembled amid the endless battle cries. Damn it! Thales' teeth chattered and his lips trembled. He was incredibly embarrassed by his performance in his first battle. I have to calm down quickly. However, no one seemed to pay attention to him. The soldiers beside him were looking at his surroundings nervously, afraid that someone would break through the layers of defense around them from any direction. A scream of pain traveled into the air. That was the sound from a Constellation soldier who had his waist cut in half. As he trembled, Thales closed his eyes. Calm down. At that moment, that familiar fluctuation spread out in his heart. The world around him seemed to have become quiet. Thales instantly gained control over his entire body. He could clearly adjust which part of his muscles were trembling. With the help of the fluctuations, he started breathing deeply in a rhythmic manner. He placated those muscles of his and finally calmed down those instinctive trembles. His heartbeat and breathing calmed down as well. However, this was not enough. Thales turned his head around incredibly slowly, and as if time had been slowed down as well, he began thinking rapidly in his mind. How do we get out of this predicament? No, I don't understand military affairs at all. This is Araka and Sonia's specialty. I can only think about this in an even more comprehensive and fundamental area. Such as, why Lampard wants to kill me. No. I should think about this in another angle. If I die here, what is Lampard's goal? What sort of benefits would he gain? I have to think of his motives and the benefits he would gain. Impossible. Killing Constellation's diplomat group and Constellation's heir will bring him no benefits whatsoever. So what exactly is Lampard trying to do? Did someone bribe him? At that moment, the memories of his past life, which had been absent in his life for quite some time, appeared in his head once again. War is social conflict that is incredibly complicated and is something that would about a great amount of changes, but we have been ignoring it for a long period of time from our course. The results many academicians obtain from their research are just a response to Clausewitz's classic analysis. Malevich suggested that structure, organization, and legal ideologies in war are the prerequisites for large-scale collective violence. Weber had never clearly infused this particular social phenomenon into his theory, but he did mention it in his definition of modern countries. The forces of power controlling a nation will monopolize the legal use of violence over the territory they declare as their own. Thales fought against the memories flashing in his head with much difficulty to try and focus on the emergency before his eyes. Damn it! On the territory they declare as their own. Wait. Thales' pupils narrowed. Perhaps it isn't that complicated. War is never aimed to kill. Territory. Lampard's original aim was to seize the northern territory. That's why. The fluctuation left, and it was as though the flow of time returned to normal. The sounds of massacre and death once again rang beside his ears. Thales laid face down on the ground, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. He found the root to this conflict. Now, I must solve it. No, an exited infantryman watched in fear as Araka cut open his throat. You are. However, he was not able to finish his words. Take my position. Gritting his teeth, Araka cut down a rough-looking man wielding a hammer. Roaring furiously, he retreated. Two sword and shield soldiers filled in his position in the defense line with determined expressions. Their momentum to this charge has almost been completely whittled down. Panting, Araka dragged his great sword and walked to the middle of the battle array. He spoke to Ida, have some rear guards stay back. Take the prince with you. I will open a path back to the fortress. Wait. Thales could not care about resting. He anxiously lifted his head and shouted, attracting Poutre and Araka's attention, Lampard. Lampard's army. He did not send heavy swordsmen, cavaliers, and even archers. He only sent these light infantrymen whom he enlisted temporarily. Thales anxiously recalled what little knowledge he had on warfare. They do not intend to defeat us within a short period of time. That is why you want to stay here to repay him. Araka turned around and mocked him, to repay Lampard's kindness for letting us live for another quarter of an hour. He wants hold us back here for a quarter of an hour, not killing us as soon as possible. Thales refused Ida trying to support him and stood up with much difficulty. Lampard is taking a gamble. He's betting on his opponent's choice. Our choice. By the side, Wya thrust his sword forward from behind a shield, then forced an axe back. Before Wya was struck in his face by a longsword, Ralph dragged the powerless man right on time. Wya spoke while panting, he's betting whether we will break through or defend till our deaths. No. Thales widened his eyes and stared intently at Araka. Lampard is taking a risk with us. No. Poutre instantly understood, and his face turned pale. He would absolutely not dare to use your life to. Thales said anxiously, Archduke Lampard is betting on the broken dragon fortress behind us. He's betting on Lady Sonia Caesar's choice. Gambling on whether she will send reinforcements to save us. Araka's pupils narrowed. His gamble, Thales roared, is my life and his future. Chapter 104 Gamble 2. Far off, the Archduke of Black Sand, Chapman Lampard sat fully equipped on his horse. Protected by countless infantry and cavalry troops, he gazed into the distance with an air of cool detachment. Amid the deafening battle cries, the two Constellation flags, which were a distance away, fluttered under the encirclement of more than 2,000 extra light, exited infantrymen. These men were divided into 6 large troops. Archduke Lampard touched the sword on his waist. It was the sword he used to kill his elder brother during the duel. He had not been apart from it for more than 10 years. It has begun. Behind him, Count Levan said softly, they will break out of the encirclement very soon and retreat towards the fortress. We only have to wait for Caesar to dispatch reinforcement troops. His most trusted advisor, Viscount Kenvida, also nodded. The light cavalry and mounted infantry on both sides of the battlefield are already prepared. We will be able to rapidly flank any troops that come to their aid from the fortress. The knights and 300 heavy cavalry have already unloaded half of their load. They will be able to charge even faster. Even if all 3,000 people in the fortress hold each other's hands and surge out, we can at least utterly defeat their vanguards immediately. That is, if they do not retreat within 5 minutes. 500 heavy swordsmen and 800 heavy armor axemen are awaiting orders. They can follow. The archers, the mystic gun unit and the remaining normal recruits can also launch an attack. When they start to break out of the encirclement, we can take the opportunity in advance. The heavy infantry can start off before the others. However, at this moment, Chapman Lampard raised his hand and halted Kenvida's report with a serious expression on his face. No, make everyone stay put and wait for orders. No one is allowed to approach the battlefield arbitrarily. Let the light infantry continue fighting. We should give the fortress flower some time to contemplate whether to dispatch troops to the rescue. Next to Archduke Lampard, Lord Tolja's expression became stern after hearing his words. If they break out of the encirclement towards the fortress direction, it is better if we let our main forces follow up appropriately. Familiar with battle affairs, he furrowed his brows and said, if the distance is too big, even if our cavaliers stall Caesar's reinforcement troops, the heavy infantry will not be able to catch up. Forget about annihilating her opponents in a field operation. With her abilities, she can totally seize their prince back in time. In the event that happens, it will not matter if we take the opportunity to lay siege to the city, or deplete their forces through field operation, our plan would lose its meaning. Watching the situation of the battle from afar, Lampard shook his head slightly. Caesar is a cautious person. Archduke Lampard looked at the broken dragon fortress, looking perplexed. He said slowly, to lure her to dispatch troops, we must take the risk and give her some hope. If she does not dispatch her troops, their prince will definitely perish in the battlefield. If she dispatches her troops, there might be a 50% chance of seizing back their prince. And as the prince breaks out of the encirclement from the back and become increasingly near to the fortress, the chances of seizing back the prince will become higher. When she sees that there is more hope, plus the likelihood of success is getting higher, Sonia Caesar will not be able to help it and be wavered. Even people more cautious and rational than her would be tempted. Lampard's eyes flashed with an unprecedented desire for a challenge. His gaze was focused on Broken Dragon Fortress flag of Constellation, the double cross-shaped stars flag. Now, we will see what our old rival, the Fortress Flower, chooses. Sonia Caesar, will you dispatch reinforcements to rescue your only prince? Or, will you watch helplessly as the heir to Constellation perishes in battle? What is going on? Standing on the tall fortress wall, Sonia watched the chaotic battle taking place on the plains from afar. She gritted her teeth and punched the wall of the Broken Dragon Fortress hard. Does Lampard want to murder his highness here in public? There are only about 2,300 light infantrymen surrounding the prince. With the Fury Guards there, they may be able to hold up for a while. However, there is after all, too big a difference in the number of people. Observing the enemy's situation on the plains, she furrowed her brows and said, Lampard's other main forces are very far away. If Baron Merk can break out of the encirclement with the prince in tow and withdraw some distance away, we should be able to dispatch reinforcements in time to tear apart the light infantry's encirclement and bring the prince back. Turning her head, Miranda said to Sonia, I can launch an attack. I need 1,000 people, including elites who can break through the enemy's formation like the Starlight Brigade. The Starlight Brigade can go on horseback. The opponent only consists of some light infantry. If we are only to break through the blockade and rescue His Highness. No way. Sonia looked at the stalemated battlefield in anger and said with difficulty, the prince's diplomat group is not his main target. For us to dispatch our only city defense elites to rescue the prince, this is what Lampard wants. I dare guarantee that his cavaliers are prepared to gallop at full speed to intercept our reinforcements at all costs. They would even brave the attack of the forts, arrows with no regard for casualties in order to break into the fortress gate. And then, attack us on a massive scale. They would at least be able to annihilate our reinforcement troops. If the former happens, the fortress faces the risk of falling into their hands. If the latter happens, he can also deplete a lot of the fortress forces and pave the way for him to lay siege to the city after this. Sonia clenched her fists tightly. We must not act according to the enemy's thought process. Miranda raised her eyebrows and remained silent for a while. A distance away, the sounds of fighting continued. However, that is the second prince, and also Constellation's only heir. Miranda contemplated for a while and said quietly, if the fortress does not dispatch troops, it is very possible for him to perish in the battle. His Majesty. Gritting her teeth, Sonia shut her eyes and let out a long sigh. This is Lampard's aim. He is waiting for my choice, between the fortress and the prince's safety, between military affairs and politics. He wants me to choose one between the two. This is a very obvious trap. It seemed impossible for Lampard to seize the fortress in the beginning. Who would have thought that he somehow found an opportunity? Lampard's boldness truly exceeds my imagination. Grasping the sword at her waist tightly, Miranda raised her head and said, perhaps with Baron Merk's ability, he would be able to bring the prince nearer to us after breaking out of the encirclement. He may even bring the prince within the fort's area of protection. We will try our best to fight a quick battle and bring the prince to safety before their follow-up forces arrive. Be careful. Sonia abruptly opened her eyes. Her gaze was full of caution. This is exactly how Lampard wants us to think. The fortress is our biggest support. You have no idea how much he yearns for our troops to leave the fortress and fall into the rhythm of a chaotic battle with him. Everything he does is so that he can smoothly seize Broken Dragon Fortress by paying the smallest price. Miranda was stunned. But, does he really dare to have the crime of murdering the Prince of Constellation over his head as a stake? What if the Prince of Constellation really dies in the battlefield? Watching the battle from afar, Lord Tolja said hesitantly, everything is possible in the battlefield. Then, we will see whether the Sunset Goddess gives us her blessings, and how loyal Sonia Caesar is towards the Jadestar royal family. Archduke Lampard spoke in a low voice, if we win this gamble, we will open the door to Constellation's northern territory. If we lose, HMPH. He did not speak any further. I am afraid that the prince's life and death has nothing to do with luck, but with our choice, Viscount Kenvita pondered and said. If Caesar refuses to dispatch troops, and would rather defend the fortress and watch as their prince's army is totally wiped out, are we really going to kill everyone in the prince's diplomat group? Not necessarily. Count Levan shook his head. The ones we dispatched are only light infantrymen. Based on the situation on the battlefield right now, the Constellations can at least hold up for more than 15 minutes. If it really comes to that, it will not be too late for us to sound the horn to withdraw our troops. And then invite the prince in and tell him that everything, including the death of so many people, was just a misunderstanding. Tolja furrowed his brows and answered. Their Archduke raised the reins and took a few steps forward on his horse to see the situation more clearly. If Caesar still cowers like a turtle and refuses to dispatch our troops, it does not matter. Archduke Lampard looked at the large fortress with an indifferent expression. Then he tightened the sword belt around his waist and inhaled a mouthful of air that was exclusive to the cold winter. If it really gets to that, we will slaughter every single person in that diplomat group and leave only the little 7-year-old rascal alive. And then, everyone in the fortress will see how we strip their only prince naked and tie him up on a flagpole. We will then attack the fortress with their air hoisted up. Let us see how great of an ordeal the Constellations can take with their morale. Of course, whether we succeed or not, that poor little rascal will live and be sent to Dragon Cloud City later as a sign of our respect and loyalty towards King Nuvan. I will not stain myself with the Jadestar royal family's blood. Ever since the era of the Empire, that family's blood has been abound with curses and misfortune. Under such a situation, as long as he does not die, the Constellations will only see the humiliation their prince has brought upon them instead of their enmity towards the Lampard family. Hearing this, Tolja could not help but furrow his brows tightly. He is only a 7-year-old child. The unsmiling Archduke Lampard was silent. A flashback of his younger self fighting with his brother for fun crossed his mind. However, the others did not know what he was thinking. The next moment, Chapman Lampard raised his gaze and said in a chilly tone, he is a prince. From the time he was born, it has been impossible for him to go through this stage known as childhood. This is their privilege, and also a price they have to pay. Tolja looked at Archduke Lampard in a daze, as though he wanted to say something. However, in the end, he just lowered his head and sighed. Viscount Kenvita furrowed his brows. That child will detest you, when he is crowned as king in the future. However, he was cut off by the Archduke. He will be afraid of me, Lampard said with curt finality. Even if he becomes the king of Constellation, wears the 9-pointed star royal crown on his head and holds the Constellation staff. I will still make him remember this day clearly, the most humiliating, scary and terrifying day of his life. Clang, asterisk. Gennard raised his shield and blocked a heavy mace. He could not help but lower his body from the large force. However, the veteran cleverly took the opportunity to wave his sword and split his opponent's kneecap. He then ended his opponent's life when the latter fell onto the ground. But then, a sword, which came at an angle that was difficult to block, pierced through Gennard's left shoulder blade. Enduring the pain, he trembled as he retreated to the second row. Nevertheless, the soldier who replaced his position obviously did not have enough experience. The moment he went forward, his thigh was wounded by a sword. Gennard could only grit his teeth and go forward again, holding up the enemy's sword so that his injured comrade could retreat. The veteran could feel that the Exted infantry's offensive frequency was reducing. It seems like the time to break out of the encirclement has arrived. However, at this moment, Gennard sighed. In the battlefield, the new recruits with poor skills would all die first. The veterans who survived were all tough like iron. They were clever and valiant. What follows will be a tough battle indeed. So, the key to the battlefield lies in Caesar's choice. In the middle of the battle array, Thales gasped for breath as he spoke to Putre, who was nodding slightly, and Araka, whose face was hideous and covered in blood. And no matter what choice she makes, Lampard most probably has his own corresponding tactic. To attack and occupy the fortress, to weaken our military forces, or to capture me in a humiliating manner and use me as a chip to attack. Regardless of what she chooses, we will be in a predicament. Putre furrowed his brows. These light infantrymen of Lampard are enough to put us in a fix. The soldiers will not be able to go on for too long. Araka chuckled coldly as he looked around at his dead and wounded subordinates who were lying on top of each other, feeling extremely angry. If you have any ideas, you better spit it out before the extichans turn us into minced meat and conveniently hang you up. Thales paid no heed to Araka's disrespect. He raised his head and glanced at the Lampard family's iron fist flag not far away. He exhaled and said slowly, no matter what Sonia chooses, it will be a predicament. Therefore, we cannot let her choose. Thales' gaze became cold. Amid Putre and Araka's different expressions, he clenched his fists. We can only choose for Lady Caesar. To eliminate her indecisiveness and hesitance. Prepare to break out of the encirclement, the second prince said sternly. Araka curled up the corners of his lips. It seems like they are going to start breaking out of the encirclement. Looking at the battle situation from afar, Miranda said hesitantly, are we really not dispatching reinforcements? Even if they really break through the tight encirclement and approach the fortress? Sonia shut her eyes in agony. No. My biggest responsibility is to guard. I have failed once, this time, I cannot fail again. No. Gritting her teeth, Sonia lowered her head and supported herself on the fortress wall with both hands. With difficulty, she said, it would be impossible to save them if we only dispatch a small number of troops. However, if we dispatch all our elites, it would suit Lampard's desire. Guard our fortress well, we cannot give him even the slightest chance. As for His Majesty, I will answer to him. Miranda did not say anything. There was silence atop the fortress wall for quite a while. However, the silence was soon broken. The sounds of battle rang from afar again. Commanding officer. In shock, Miranda looked at the chaotic battlefield. They have started to break out of the encirclement. But it is very strange. Miranda's face was full of disbelief. Sonia opened her eyes, puzzled. Tolja anxiously rode his horse over from afar. Sir, there is news from the light cavalry. They have started to break out of the encirclement. Archduke Lampard opened his eyes and looked towards the two constellation flags. Very good, he opened his mouth and said, now, we will wait for Caesar. Lampard narrowed his eyes. The fluttering of the flags. It is not quite right. He immediately noticed that something was amiss. It cannot be. Archduke Lampard widened his eyes and opened his mouth in shock. Could it be that? Yes sir, we have to revise our plan immediately, Tolja said loudly and nervously. And according to the light cavalry's report, there has been more than one accident. Lampard suppressed the irritation in his heart and threw Tolja a questioning glance. Sitting on horseback, Tolja gritted his teeth and said, there is someone together with that prince. Furrowing his brows tightly, Archduke Lampard watched as Tolja proceeded to speak. The words he said made the expressions of all the vassals around him change abruptly. It is him. It is that man carrying that bow. With a stony expression, Araka bound Thales tightly on his back. Thales was pressed close against Araka's large metal bow. It had silver and black stripes on it. Is it really safe to stay on this fella's back? Ida asked furiously, I keep feeling like I have lost my job. Thales smiled at her, just take it as a break, even authors take breaks from writing their stories sometimes. This is very risky, it means that we are also gambling, Putre said worriedly, we are betting on the enemy's choice. Thales inhaled deeply and smiled at Putre. Yes, Lampard and I are betting on one another. It is a game of, do you dare? Little prince, I am asking you for the last time, seeing that most of the Fury guards in the first row were either dead or injured, Araka suppressed the rage in his heart. He spoke in a chilly tone, are you sure that you want to do this? This is the only way, Thales said as he smiled bitterly. Araka did not say anything. And are you really as great as the rumors say? Gritting his teeth, Thales laid face down on Araka's back. He adjusted his stomach, which was pressed against the big bow and forced a smile. Please, prove it to me. Araka still did not speak. Thales shut his eyes slowly and opened them with determination. His gaze was sharp. The most valiant warrior in Constellation. Araka Merc. He exhaled softly and shouted the nickname that everyone in Constellation knew, the Kingdom's Wrath. The moment these words were spoken, those who were in a predicament had an inspired look. It was as if even the atmosphere around him had changed. The next moment, Araka turned his head and chuckled coldly at Thales. A long time ago, in a hopeless situation, a Jadastar once told me that Thales could not help but feel stunned. Baraka pulled out his two-handed greatsword from the ground. He waved it a few times and walked forward. The others such as Putre, Wya and Ralph followed them from behind. Some had determined expressions whereas some were weighed down with worry. Baraka stepped onto the stirrup with a stride. His gaze was fierce. Ida nimbly followed their horse from behind. Baraka continued to speak in a chilly tone. He said, "Since there is no way to retreat, why not charge forward with all your might?" Thales did not know how to react. The next moment, the man known as the Kingdom's Wrath, Baraka Merc rode his horse forward with a fierce expression. He overtook his squad of guards. Fury Guards, assault formation. The Kingdom's Wrath pointed his greatsword towards the iron fist flag that fluttered high in the distance. He roared furiously. "The target is, north. We are going to Lampod." Chapter 105 The Kingdom's Wrath. An Exted light infantryman gripped the hammer in his hand tightly. Breathing steadily, he knocked the thick wooden shield in his left hand rhythmically and followed the footsteps of the teammate in front of him closely. As one of more than 10 unit leaders under Lirok's military unit, he was over 30 years old and this was not his first time in the battlefield. The men of Northland were born to wield swords in battle. It did not matter if they were farmers, hunters, craftsmen or woodcutters. Sometimes, it was so for women too. To shed blood in the battlefield and slug it out with the most powerful enemies, the survivors would then swig the wine of victory to their heart's content. How satisfying and glorious was that? He would get even more elated and excited each time he swung his hammer. He savored the vague sounds of cracking bones in his enemies' bodies. An example would be now, as the unit leader over 30 years old, he roared joyfully and stepped forward to catch up with his comrade. He forcefully knocked his hammer into the crown of a constellation who could not dodge in time. Roaring furiously, he pulled out his hammer and blood splattered on his face. The next moment, the unit leader pounced on another citizen of Constellation, who went forward as replacement without hesitation. These Constellations are truly tough. Having thought of that, he swung his shield at his opponent and made the person stagger. With such casualties, normal troops would have lost their morale a long time ago, scattering themselves and fleeing. Unless, they are elites. Unless, they have a competent commander who was just as firm. With agility as well as experience, the unit leader dodged his opponent's sudden and dangerous sword thrust. The sword's blade grazed past the left side of his forehead. "Hey, you are a veteran." The unit leader laughed out loud and swung his hammer, causing the enemy to retreat. Clip-clop, asterisk. Clang, asterisk. Slash, asterisk. Various sounds rang from the side, of hooves, clashing, and sword blades splitting armors in half. A solid and fierce, male voice rang from a battle steed. "We are looking for Lampod." The Constellations, who were in a defensive formation, had their spirits lifted at the same time. They shouted and strode forward, trailing the knights on the battle steeds as they charged at the extensions. The unit leader's expression changed. They are breaking out of the encirclement. But, why are they going north? Although the encirclement is indeed a little weaker on the northern side compared to the side of Broken Dragon Fortress, but even if they break through, they would only face the Archduke's military camp and other, even more elite troops, right? And, what about that knight who charged out of the battle formation? It was a menacing man who swung his greatsword with force. With a swing of his sword, he chopped off someone's head and sent blood as well as flesh splattering everywhere. Meanwhile, the battle steed beneath him sent 2 men flying. A child was tied to his back alongside a large bow with silver and black stripes. "Wait." The unit leader narrowed his eyes. "Is it, that bow?" Shortly after, he shouted. "Him. It's him." The unit leader of Extit's light infantry roared loudly. He was in a frenzy like he had found the most rewarding war booty. He paid no further attention to the panting Constellation veteran in front of him. Grinding his teeth in excitement, he charged towards the steed without hesitation. The unit leader shouted deliriously. "The Kingdom's Wrath." Many of the Extichans trembled and turned their heads towards the man on the horse. The unit leader raised his shield over his head to protect himself from the man's greatsword. He swung the hammer in his hand into the steed's belly. However, the greatsword did not swerve over. It was not deflected by his shield as he had expected. Instead, the greatsword quivered in the man's hand and it was thrust downwards. The unit leader could only feel his right collarbone becoming cold. He then felt a surge of extreme pain. The battle steed grazed past him. His knees buckled and blood flowed out from his shoulder. Despite that, he still swung his weapon with all his might. The hammer scratched the steed's belly, inflicting another injury on the battle steed, which was already covered in wounds. The battle steed let out a sad cry and collapsed along with the man in front of the unit leader. Hee, at least, I stopped the steed of the Kingdom's Wrath, the unit leader thought, with much effort. His shield fell out of his hand. Pressing onto the bleeding wound on his shoulder, he felt the pain that pierced deep into his lungs. The unit leader then raised his hammer with all his might. He wanted to swing it towards the man, who was climbing up from the ground, as well as the boy behind his back. My last blow will kill the kingdom's wrath, he thought. However, as soon as this thought appeared, a petite figure wearing a cloak rushed over from the back. She swung her machete rapidly and sliced off the unit leader's right hand. Arg! The unit leader roared in indignation. At the very next moment, Gennard also rushed over from the back, and chopped off the unit leader's head with his blade. You are right, panting, Gennard told the dead body, I am a veteran. The soldiers of the Fury Guards risked their life and charged forward one by one. They pushed aside the enemies in their way and tried their best to scramble to Araka Merc's side. At this point, Poutre and the others were only just catching up to Araka. The battlefield became chaotic because the soldiers of Constellation broke the encirclement. The kingdom's wrath, he is here, many of Extit's soldiers shouted with excitement, and the news spread rapidly throughout the battlefield. Like sharks who smelled blood, countless soldiers of Extit charged towards Araka and Thales. They snarled savagely as they approached from the front, the sides and the back. Really, behind them, Wya spoke in dissatisfaction, he is like a target. He is even piggybacking His Highness. Do not doubt your commander. Poutre fell down from his steed as well. He rapidly advanced forward within the triangular battle formation used by the soldiers for assault. At least believe in the prestige of the kingdom's wrath. His Highness' safety is best assured by his side. Thales anxiously lay face down on Araka's back and suppressed the dizziness he felt from falling down the steed earlier. What do we do now? Araka held his sword calmly with both hands and split open the light armor of an enemy to his left. He just left the man there, lying on the ground and wailing. He looked at the Iron Fist flag, which was a distance away. He then looked at the countless number of enemies that were charging towards them. The soldiers filled the fan-shaped area in front of Araka as well as Thales and surrounded them. In a cold tone, he said, the steeds could only bring us until here. Assault formation, Araka shouted loudly, and his whole body trembled. Pressed against Araka, Thales could clearly feel that Araka's heart rate was increasing and that his body was heating up. His muscles were also expanding and trembling rhythmically. He was like a predatory wild beast who was prepared to start hunting. Thales immediately realized that this was Araka's power of eradication. In his field of vision, Araka was like a raging volcano. Explosive, ominous, and terrifying fluctuations emitted ceaselessly from the inside of Araka's body. Araka gritted his teeth. He held his sword in his right hand and gripped the leather covering on the ridge of the sword with his left hand. Dragging his weapon behind him, he charged towards a large number of enemies in front of him. As if by a conditioned reflex, the surviving soldiers of the Fury Guards caught up to him on both sides. They followed their commander and charged towards the opponents without hesitation. Araka was at the forefront, like the cutting edge of a knife. At the front line, 5 blades whizzed towards him at the same time. 3 were aimed at his head and chest, while the other 2 were aimed respectively at both his sides. A furious roar erupted from Araka's throat. He thrust his feet into the ground, lowered his body, and charged at these soldiers. Being tightly bound, Thales tried his best to bend his head and press it closely against Araka's shoulders. Even so, he could still feel at least 3 blades grazing past the top of his head. Araka shouted explosively. All of a sudden, the blood vessels on his arms expanded and transmitted an explosive force. He swung his massive 2-handed sword fiercely and created a bloody arc in the air. Slash. 3 of the soldiers' blades along with their forearms broke away from their control and fell powerlessly onto the ground. Blood splattered down onto Thales' forehead. He gritted his teeth and furrowed his brows. Does it have to be so bloody every time? Araka did not even care about the soldiers who attacked him from both sides. Howling, he crashed into the chest of the light infantryman in front of him. That man was holding his right hand and wailing miserably when it happened. Araka fiercely elbowed him and made him fall. The Fury Guards on both sides were only a bit slower than Araka. Similarly, they roared furiously and charged. They stopped the 2 soldiers whom Araka had missed before they could plunge their blades into his vital organs. The Fury Guard on the left successfully thrust his sword into the opponent's lower abdomen. He then pushed off the opponent, who was shrieking in pain. Ignoring what happened next, he continued to follow Araka. They proceeded to assault the second row of enemies. As for the Fury Guard on the right, he was unfortunately pierced by the Extit soldier's blade. However, he continued to charge forward without any regard for danger. He pounced on the enemy and brought him to the ground. Another soldier walked over the 2 individuals, who were grappling with each other on the ground without even looking. He reinforced the triangular-shaped assault formation and continued to move forward. In a little more than a second, at the tip of the formation, the fierce Araka advanced and broke through the first row of enemies. Without reducing his speed, he continued charging forward. However, within his close proximity, a squad formed by 5 experienced veterans attacked head-on. 3 of them were wielding shields and blades, while the other 2 were holding axes. They stared vigilantly at Araka. The kingdom's wrath, the person in the middle said in a deep voice, you shall not pass, Before he could finish his words, Araka ferociously thrust his sword and pierced it straight into his shield. With his frightening force as well as the momentum of the impact, the sword's blade came out from the other side and pierced into the enemy's chest. However, the blade was stuck between the shield and the enemy's chest bone. Groaning in pain, the enemy still did what he could to hold Araka's greatsword in place. He put in a lot of effort so that the three people around him could take Araka's life before he died. The blade of an axe was the first one to whiz over. Without any hesitation, Araka threw out his left fist with a rabid expression on his face. With an alarming force, he punched the middle of the greatsword's blade. And with a clank, the greatsword broke. Araka howled and charged forward. He kicked the second shield-wielding veteran onto the ground. He then extended his left wrist and moved it to the side of the axe's blade, diverting it away from his head. Under the enemy's shocked gazes, the axe slid past Araka's forearm, taking with it a piece of skin and flesh. The broken sword in Araka's hand was thrust into the axe wielder's neck before he could react. Roaring furiously, the last two enemies charged towards Araka. However, the latter did not even look at them. He was fully focused on dashing forward. Just as before, the Fury guards on both of his sides trailed behind him. They risked their lives and pounced forward, eliminating the threat of the two remaining people on his behalf. This time, both of them were not as lucky and they lost their lives. However, the rest of the Fury guards behind them still pounced forward without any regard for their lives. They maintained the formation and eliminated the dangers that came from both sides. Thales suddenly realized something. The sword and shield soldiers of the Fury guards were shielding both of Araka's sides with their lives. This was so that the latter could break through the enemy line in front of him and get to the center without any disturbances. This would ensure that the momentum of his unstoppable and frightening force was always at its highest. In a little over 2 seconds, Araka had broken through the second row. The next batch of enemies appeared before him. Two individuals in front of him were holding long spears. The tip of the spears were aimed straight at Araka's heart. They were determined to force Araka into retreating with the tip of their spears, no matter how Araka was charging forward. Another three shielded the sides of these two people's body closely. However, Araka did not give them such a chance. He shouted at the top of his lungs, and the power of eradication, which came in the form of an explosive fluctuation, surged into his right arm. Like an erupting volcano, he threw the broken sword in his hand, which was extremely battered. The whiz of death lasted for a couple of seconds. The tip of the blade, which still had remnants of blood and flesh on it, pierced into one of the men's faces. He quivered and the long spear in his hand, which was pointed towards Araka, fell powerlessly. "No, brother," the other spearman beside him cried out in sadness. Araka's expression was ferocious. He grabbed the front part of the falling long spear and took it into his hand. He then thrust the long spear forward fiercely. His power of eradication was activated again. As Araka howled like a maniac, the other spearman was hit in the chest by a force that was akin to that of a siege hammer. Groaning, he could not take it anymore and fell onto the ground. After that, the howling stopped abruptly. The long spear was again retrieved by Araka. He then used it as a rod. Waving it with force, he swept it towards the lower bodies of the remaining three people. Without changing his expression, Araka turned the spear and stabbed one of the three people on the ground to death. He then continued charging forward without looking back. The Fury guards on both sides again caught up and got rid of the remaining two people. "How long can you keep this up?" Thales looked at the dense mass of enemies in front of him, and then at the iron fist flag far away. Calculating the time and distance in his mind, he asked Araka. "Long enough," Araka spoke in a deep voice and dashed towards a sword-wielding infantryman, "as long as the Fury guards are still around." Within 5 seconds, Araka had broken through the third row. Under Thales' stunned gaze, Araka flung the long spear steadily. It pierced into the thigh of someone attacking them head-on. Totally unarmed, the Kingdom's Wrath dashed forward with all his might, dodging a sword in the process. However, it left a wound on his right arm. The Fury guards pounced forward fiercely as always, getting rid of the enemies on both sides with their bravery and sacrifice. Amid the frenzied and furious roars, the blade of an axe came attacking. The Kingdom's Wrath dashed 2 steps forward without a glance. He grabbed the long spear by its pole and threw it. It caused the enemy, who was holding his thigh and gritting his teeth, to fall. At the same time, Araka nimbly turned around and blocked the blade of the axe with the long spear's pole. Snap! Asterisk. The pole broken as if it was all planned beforehand. Araka held the broken pole. With the broken piece, he turned his body and hit the axe wielder hard on the bridge of his nose. As the axe wielder groaned and shut his eyes, the Kingdom's Wrath ditched the broken long spear and grabbed the handle of the axe, which was between the axe wielder's hands. He did so with accuracy and pulled it towards himself. Araka headbutted his opponent's already injured nose in a fearsome and violent manner. As his opponent fell to the ground dizzily, he snatched the axe. Araka overtook him and the other fellow, who was panting and holding his pierced thigh. Araka continued his assault. Within 8 seconds, Araka had broken through the enemy's 4th row. However, one of the Fury guards was killed. Within 11 seconds, Araka had cracked open the heads of 2 soldiers with the axe and broke through the 5th row. 2 of his Fury guards died. During the 16th second, two infantrymen, who were obviously military officers in chain armor, approached them. Uraka made a shield soldier retreat with the axe and he spent some time to snatch a short sword. He pierced it into the two military officers' unprotected eyes and throat, after which he broke through the 6th row. During the 19th second, Uraka pierced a person's dominant hand easily by thrusting the sword. He then used his enemy as a shield. He seized the axes of two soldiers and twisted their necks. He then used one of the axes to cut open the fourth person's chest. He had now broken into the 7th row. Another one of the Fury Guards died. Thales watched all of this with his eyes wide and mouth agape. He watched as the bare-handed Uraka snatched an enemy's blade with bold momentum as well as instinctive battle skills, and broke through the interception of countless opponents. Could it be, this is the Knight of Honor that the deceased from my past life talked about? Amid the assault of the kingdom's wrath, the Exted Light Infantry's line of battle was like a thin piece of paper. It was rapidly being penetrated by Uraka. It was the type of speed one had when training for a run. Damn it, does he never get tired? Gasping for breath behind Uraka, Wya slit the throat of an enemy who was wailing in distress on the ground. He watched Uraka's assault in shock. We have been running all the way and we have not stopped at all. Is this the first time you have heard of his nickname? Putre snorted softly. Next to them, Ida pursed her lips. His movements when he faces a large number of enemies and his multiple blows are even smoother than they were 5 years ago. Within a matter of minutes, they had broken through more than 20 lines of defense. However, the members of the Fury Guards on both sides were still continuously sacrificing themselves. In his anxiousness, Thales noticed something. Uraka is gritting his teeth harder and harder. He is also gasping more and more for breath. How long can he hold up his physical strength? With a cold expression, Uraka thrust a hammer into its original owner's face. Pushing away the enemy, who was wailing miserably, he roared and charged at the next person. It was a fully armored military officer. He had a frightening double-sided great axe in his hand. He was giving out some orders loudly. He seems to be a commander. Listening to the military officer's orders, Thales furrowed his brows and thought to himself. The kingdom's wrath was a legend. All of Exted's soldiers had heard of his nickname, and all legends of the battlefield were related to him. The body of this frightening man contained the fire and fury of the entire of Constellation. No one had ever been able to block his assaults. At least, this was what Lirok heard as the commander of Exted's light infantry military unit. Until he too saw it with his own eyes that day. Lirok was a Northlander who was 6.5 feet in height, and at that moment, he furrowed his brows tightly. Watching Uraka break through half of his military unit like there was no one there at all, Lirok gently stroked his double-sided great axe. He licked his teeth and looked eagerly at Uraka, who was in front of him. With Lirok's super-class abilities, he could have been the leader of a heavy-armored axeman unit. However, those damn heavy armors were just too expensive. Besides, he preferred being a commander. Many warriors would lose their reason when driven by bloodlust. Only madness would be left. They neglected to defend themselves and lacked resourcefulness. However, this would not happen to him. Lirok knew very well that the truth of the battlefield was not to kill and injure, but to survive. Lirok took a deep breath and inhaled a mouthful of cold air. He looked at Uraka, who was charging at him, and Thales, who was on Uraka's back. He then looked at the Fury Guards on both of Uraka's sides and flashed a little smile. I have found your weakness. The Kingdom's Wrath. Chapter 106 The Failed Bet. Lirok yelled and took a few steps back in an urgent manner to avoid Uraka's offensive move. Under his command, the dozens of Exted infantrymen beside Lirok neither formed a formation nor retreated. Instead, they pounced directly at the Fury Guards flanking Uraka. Uraka's expression darkened. In the midst of the angry roaring and sounds of collisons, Exted soldiers tenaciously wrapped themselves around the Fury Guards. Standing at the forefront, Uraka was left alone in an instant with no one shielding and protecting him on either side. 7 or 8 of Exted's warriors surrounded him with vicious expressions on their faces. Thales's expression changed drastically. Oh no. Uraka relied heavily on the sacrifice and protection of the guards by his sides to maintain his absolute advantage in front to fight the enemies without a worry. Otherwise, maybe after Uraka had killed up to 10 people, his speed would decrease and he would be caught up in the impenetrable encirclement once again. Even a skilled supreme class elite would have died after such a huge consumption of energy. Also, to face countless enemies, various types of attacks, and many weapons all at the same time on the battlefield, like Ida said, even a supreme class elite could never be entirely unscathed. Just like Uraka's current situation, the gradual accumulation of injuries and the increasing consumption of energy. Uraka stared at the situation before him as he panted slightly. Cover him. Ida agilely made her way through the 3 well-coordinated Exted infantries, but it was obvious that she was not used to the rhythm of the battlefield what with the swords coming from all directions, so she could not free herself for a moment. Cover Uraka, she yelled exasperatedly, otherwise, they would drag us back into their tight encirclement once again. Wya was held back by 2 enemies. He could not escape swiftly from battle due to him being injured, but it was clear that since Putre did not possess the same skills as they did, he could shake off his enemies calmly and easily to protect Araka. Because Araka's conical attack formation helped him to break through very quickly, the numerous extant soldiers that fell behind them ran and pursued after them once again. Ralph widened his eyes and a gust of strong wind hurriedly raged and blocked the first few rows of extant soldiers by using the scattering snowflakes as a barrier. Those soldiers carrying the Fury Guard's equipment with them are all held back. Putre was having a lot of trouble dealing with the fierce and violent infantrymen's attacks. And it is obvious that our diplomat group, including you, have never fought in a war before. We are unable to break through. Are there any more people other than the Fury Guards in the diplomat group? Wya used his sword to fight his enemy, but with very slow efficiency. As long as we can break away from this encirclement, we can reach to the prince's side. A young soldier, and a veteran who held a sword and shield, suddenly turned around amid the fierce battle. Ellipsis. If Araka had the soldiers of the Fury Guards by his side, he would not have to consider the threats beside and behind him at all. He would only have to face his enemy from the front. But now, he had to face the threats from all around him. Clang. Asterisk. Lirok aimed and swung his great axe sturdily onto Araka's newly snatched nail hammer. Araka bellowed like a beast in a low voice. Even Thales could feel the oppressive atmosphere. Then, the kingdom's wrath could be seen with both of his eyes red. The nail hammer that was hooked onto the great axe suddenly trembled as the power from his body exploded in an instant. Clang. Asterisk. As the flame and sparks flickered, Lirok clenched his teeth and retreated in a disheveled state. Behind, Thales anxiously yelled. But before Thales could finish yelling, Araka had turned his head back in an instant. He struck the sword attack away from his back while he roared furiously, to ensure that Thales would not be hit. The figure of the kingdom's wrath whirled around soon after and avoided the tip of a spear that attacked at the same instant. He had already thrown out the nail hammer in his hand as he was turning back and pierced through the chest of the swordsman behind. Without others to shield and cover him, Araka was unable to continue attacking. He limped with slowed footsteps as he retreated. He managed to dodge the blade that was aimed for the vital organs in his left side, but his waist was still cut open and blood bled from the wound. Maybe we should retreat and meet with the guards, Thales yelled in pain due to an earlier injury to his back. The beastly man did not pay attention to the prince. He turned around and roared in a low voice. With a shoulder slam that exerted a force as strong as a volcano's eruption, he knocked over the blade and shield soldier who could not put away his blade in time with the shield was wedged between them. Rip. Asterisk. Araka forcefully seized the opponent's blade and sliced open his throat. The blood splattered all over Araka's body. Without any time to rest in between, the kingdom's wrath lowered his waist as he swiftly turned around. The broad sword that attacked laterally from behind could only cut into his shoulder slightly. Araka immediately aimed a low-angle kick right onto the opponent's knee. The latter grunted and lost his balance after he heard the sound of his bone fracturing. The blade of the kingdom's wrath sliced through his neck, and caught his falling sword in a smooth motion. The wind howled right at this very moment. Dang. Asterisk. A tremendous noise made Thales' eardrums vibrate with pain. Araka was seen raising the blade and the sword over his head while his feet sank into the ground. With an unwavering force, Araka resisted the great axe by Lirok that forcefully hacked downwards. You have meticulous control, so your energy is always just right and never wasted, is that not so, the kingdom's wrath of the supreme class? Lirok exhaled sinisterly. Even though we attacked at the same time, you still managed to kill 3 of us. A long spear charged towards Araka's heart. The kingdom's wrath used both his hands to fend off the great axe. With unimaginable skill, he managed to turn his chest around to avoid the sharp tip of the spear and forcefully pinned the attacking long spear between his torso and his left underarm. Another long spear attacked from nowhere. Araka unleashed his power of eradication in an instant and avoided the spear tip. Then, he stomped on the attacking long spear ferociously with his foot. Thales felt his skin crawl when he watched Araka firmly hold and block the 2 spearmen back. The spearmen were clenching their teeth strenuously and their faces were flushed red from the exertion of trying to kill Araka. This is not good. As expected, the enemy did not give him any chance to breathe. 2 extant soldiers, along with their 2 longswords, attacked Araka's torso and head. Araka spared no effort as he deflected the sword aimed for his chest, then he firmly held on to the other sword to stop it from attacking. Whoosh! A howling sound came when the great axe swung down again. But this is a battlefield. The battle has never been just 1-to-1. The commander of the enemy laughed sinisterly. He swung his great axe in a wide arc to attack. Supreme class elites also have limits. The few of Extat's infantrymen howled in anger. They appeared from behind Lirok and surrounded Araka. Thales hovered his hand over his dagger in shock as he yelled, "Be careful." In the next second, the sound of an axe piercing into flesh and a fear-inducing clanging sound of the weapons rang through the air. Splash, asterisk. Clang, asterisk. Thales felt shivers down his spine and his eardrums were in excruciating pain. No. The prince panted and, with his widened eyes, he witnessed the blade of the great axe firmly chop into Araka's left shoulder. The great axe broke through the breastplate and cut open Araka's flesh before it stopped between Araka's shoulder blades and clavicle. The great axe was only an inch away from Thales' shoulder. Araka panted heavily while blood flowed out of his wound and soaked through Thales' shoulder. The sword in the right hand of the Kingdom's Wrath had already disappeared without a trace. With just one hand, he blocked Lirok's great axe by the hilt. His whole body trembled as he was engaged in a life-and-death battle with the enemy's commander. But he was not alone. Before the edge of the axe, a black-haired, brown-eyed young soldier of Constellation knelt on one knee beside Araka. He clenched his teeth tightly and raised both his hands over his head. He held a pair of even-length pikes in each hand as he used all his strength to withstand the axe blade that had hacked into Araka's left shoulder. Damned bastard! Lirok's eyes strained with redness while his power of eradication burst out. He gradually pressed down on the axe blade in his hands. At the same time, the two spearmen who wrestled with Araka had also exerted themselves, hoping to kill the Kingdom's Wrath here. Don't even think about it. Willow Ken's hands trembled as he held the twin pikes with all of his strength to withstand the great axe above him, under gravity's pressure and Lirok's strength, to ease Araka's burden. Araka was panting hard and he was in excruciating pain while he stared at Willow with a complicated gaze. Strong wind howled in the air when Ralph's figure glided towards them. Ralph swept past the extension's weapons with great effort. He brought along two Constellation soldiers dressed in the apparel of the fortress, soldiers to fight with Lirok's subordinates, who were preparing to enter the battlefield. A sturdy veteran of Constellation abruptly dashed over. With his shield, he knocked the extant soldiers who were fighting with Araka just now onto the ground. Gennard, the veteran from the Starlight Brigade, held down his madly struggling enemy. The both of them held each other's sword hand and competed against each other with their strength and stamina, wanting to bury their swords into each other's vital organs before the other does. Is there anyone else? Thales asked anxiously while he pulled out his dagger with great effort. He hesitated on whether he should cut the rope that fastened him behind Araka. There are only a few of us left. The Fury Guards and your subordinates are all being entangled. Gennard yelled as if his life depended on it while he wrestled with his opponent. You had better be useful, you twin pike-wielding army deserter. Willow's face was flushed red and his hands shook continuously as they withstood the great axe. I said this before. The extant infantryman whose longspear was wedged between Araka's left arm and torso roared as he threw down his longspear. The infantryman pulled out a dirk from his back and charged at Araka, who was caught in a deadlock. Araka loosened his left arm and held on to Lirok's great axe with both hands. His eyes were burning with rage. I am not an army deserter. Willow spat out those few words through clenched teeth. The soldier charged frantically at Araka and Thales with his dirk in hand. Thales trembled as he cut the rope. Willow pulled back his right arm that was holding a pike while he withstood Lirok's great axe with his left hand laboriously. He yelled desperately, also, I really know how to use twin pikes. Willow's right hand suddenly lashed out. The extant soldier, dirk in his hand, stepped away from Willow's single pike. Thales had a cold feeling in his chest. This is bad. He missed the target. But Willow's hand suddenly trembled. The spear tip flashed while the pike shaft flew from his hand. Rip, asterisk. The extantian lowered his head in shock and the dirk fell from his hand. Willow's pike was no longer in his hand. The tip of the spear was already lodged in the soldier's throat. Thales exhaled a long breath and his mind began to unwind and relax. What a close call. With all his strength already used up, Willow panted while his left pike trembled and dropped from resisting the great axe. He then collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. But Lirok's great axe did not come down. Once more, Thales felt newborn power explode from the body of the man carrying him. Lirok stared at his own great axe in surprise as the Kingdom's Wrath lifted his axe up inch by inch with his arms. The beast-like man slowly stood from the ground like a volcano at the point of eruption. Did your commanding officer not tell you? Araka breathed heavily and he trembled like a beast. A scary strength exploded once again from his arms and pushed the great axe forward. Lirok stumbled and almost fell to the ground, but his subordinate was there in time to support him from behind. If you have a chance to kill me, it is best that you kill me in one strike. If you do not manage kill me, hey, Araka sneered through clenched teeth as his countenance suddenly changed. Filled up to his eyes with the fluctuations, Thales watched in surprise as the previously stirring ripples and explosions within Araka's body start to boil vigorously like lava. Lirok furrowed his brows and stared at the faint red light shining from Araka's eyes. The muscles on his injured shoulder began to contract and block his wound to stop the bleeding. What is that? He recalled the legend of the Kingdom's Wrath again. No, impossible. He is only human after all, isn't he? In the surrounding noise of carnage, Lirok roared angrily. He used all the strength in his body and charged at Araka with his few most trusted subordinates. 7 or 8 weapons thrust out at the same time. Ellipsis. Count Levan asked the military courier before him in surprise as his face was filled with disbelief. 4 minutes. That man charged at the forefront alone, and he used only 4 minutes to break through our battle formation. The Count grabbed the courier's collar in one swift motion as he angrily yelled, impossible. Those are 6 military units, almost 2,500 people, flanking from all directions. It has yet to break through completely. The military courier gasped for breath, and it seemed as if he, too, was extremely irreconcilable. He could be heard hatefully saying through clenched teeth, "Soldiers from the other directions are also trying to fill in the gap, we can drive him to death by exhaustion." He did not continue to speak. For a valiant Northland soldier like him, saying the phrase, "driving him to death by exhaustion," was already close to disgrace. Do not be surprised. From the side, Viscount Kentvida walked forward, placed his hand above the Count's hand and sighed. "We have been looking forward to meeting the kingdom's wrath for a long time." Even the White Blade guards could not hold back his beast-like frontal attack. But, 4 minutes, Count Levan had a solemn look on his face. "This is too. Uraka Merc and his strength was originally part of our plan." A steady voice from behind was heard. Both Kentvida and Levan bowed down. If he takes the lead in attacking, he can certainly break through even further on with Constellation's prince. On his warhorse, Archduke Lampod stared at the distant battle and sighed. If they want to break through to the direction of the fortress, the psychological shock delivered to the fortress will be stronger, then the chances of success for our plan in luring Caesar will probably become higher. By that time, the fortress, morale would not depend on whether Caesar wants to send her troops out or not. What a shame. Whose idea it was that actually made them face north instead of the fortress and attack in the opposite direction, it is unknown. Archduke Lampod shook his head with an abnormally regretful look on his face. Count Levan resumed his calm state and said with his brows furrowed together, "Does the 7-year-old prince also agree to court death like this?" "There is no point in overthinking." Lampod steeled his expression and shook his head resolutely. "It is already impossible for us to take back the fortress. There is another problem. So long as Merc brings along his bow, it will be very hard for the infantries to exhaust his physical strength through sheer numbers." Viscount Kentvida furrowed his brows and pondered. "The infantry's encirclement on the north side is not as tight as the south side. There is a large possibility that he might rush out until he stands before us. That would be very awkward. How should we handle Merc and that prince? If the light infantry cannot surround and stop him," Count Levan's eyes sparkled and he said in a serious tone, "but he still has a baggage with him, and he cannot enter or leave the battlefield at will. Let the light infantry continue holding the others back and transfer the main force prepared to attack the fortress back here. Regardless of whether it is the Doppelsoldners' attack or the heavy cavaliers' long-distance indiscriminate charge, either one can easily kill them all, including Merc. It is not like we do not have any experience before. Based on the battlefield skills of Kingdom Wraths, his efficiency in killing light infantry and Doppelsoldners are the same." Viscount Kentvida shook his head. "And even if we succeed, it is very likely for us to kill the Constellation's prince along with him. This is not a good choice. I am afraid we have to come up with another plan." "Please, let me go, Your Grace." Behind Lampod, Lord Tolja held a peculiarly shaped saber, and bowed down slightly from his horse. His eyes were glinting with an unlimited desire to fight. "From Merc's dead body, I will surely seize back the bow that belongs to Extit. If we cannot dispatch our main force, then I am the only person here who can confront Merc." Tolja stared at the Archduke with his burning gaze. "Let the rising sun saber confront the motionless bow." Lampod caressed the sword at his waist as he thought carefully. After more than 10 seconds, Lampod slowly shook his head and declined. "No, I do not wish for any accident to happen to you. Even if Merc does not bring along that bow, he is still too valiant." Disappointment flashed across Tolja's eyes. After all, he must already be covered all over with cuts and bruises since he has fought for around 8 minutes. This will make him even more dangerous. Viscount Kentvida vigilantly continued the Archduke's speech. "We all know the legend of that man. I heard the Tower of Eradication specifically gave his mutated power of eradication another name." Lampod lifted his head and sighed faintly. "Yes, the wrath of the dark sky, the power of eradication that was born for the battlefield." Tolja clenched the knife tightly in his hand. The Archduke was heard saying faintly, "The more he fights, the more injuries he will have. The more injuries he has, the stronger he will become." Ellipsis. When Thales regained his sense, he watched in surprise as Uraka charged at full speed towards the 7 or 8 people in front of them. Without any protection by his side, he started his breakthrough once more. Faced with the opponent's blades, Uraka's body suddenly moved in a peculiar motion. The movement seemed to have brought a fluctuation in the air. On his back, Thales suddenly felt dizzy. A sword sliced through Uraka's breastplate and left a deep wound between his ribs. A hammer and chain brushed past his raised right leg and tore away a piece of flesh. Countless sparks burst out when a saber was deflected by the gauntlet on his right hand. On the other hand, Lirok's great axe swung past Uraka's head when he suddenly turned his head around and the motion of the axe blew a wind past his ear. A long spear missed and slid over his thigh by a few centimeters. Finally, a knife cut into his unprotected left bicep, but not much blood gushed out. It seemed as if Uraka only moved slightly, avoiding all attacks to his vital organs during the attack from all the weapons in an instant. But Thales knew that this was definitely not a simple, slight movement. Uraka appeared as if he did not care how many wounds were added to his body. He only rushed forward and attacked with a feverish look on his face, until he barged right in between his enemies. Kill him, Lirok retracted his great axe and commanded in exasperation. But it was obvious that the somewhat frenetic extensions could not keep up with Uraraka's rhythm anymore. In the next second, Uraraka unleashed a furious roar that could shake the skies. An astonishing heatwave exploded from his right fist and he punched that fist into the face of a swordsman. A clear sound of bone breaking was heard. The extension howled frantically. Uraraka laughed heartily when the power of eradication erupted violently and exploded from his body. With a zealous power, Uraraka used his shoulder to knock into the shield of the hammer and chain wielder. The latter let out a miserable shriek as he flew backwards. The Kingdom's Wrath grabbed the hammer and chain released by the opponent in one swift motion. With the hammer and chain, he turned around and slammed it into the saber aimed for the back of his head and sent the saber flying into the air. The hammer and chain flew around without slowing its momentum, until it slammed into an enemy's skull. Red and white fluid splattered in all directions. Uraraka made another turn and accurately used the chain to lock a knife, then pulling his next enemy to him. He then used the enemy's lower abdomen to block a longsword that had immediately followed afterwards. The swordsman that accidentally killed his own comrade was stunned for a second before Uraraka grabbed his clothing and pulled him closer to crush his trachea. All 5 extant soldiers fell at Uraraka's feet in an instant. Lirok roared furiously as he swung his axe downwards. Uraraka immediately retreated with an astonishing speed and avoided the axe's arc with precision. Thales was already dizzy from the battle that involved rapid left and right movements. He almost passed out when Uraraka retreated. But then, an astonishing explosion was heard from the body of the Kingdom's Wrath. That force from the explosion instantly rose up and, like a swallow that suddenly turned around and darts back, that force rushed towards Lirok, who could not pull back his axe in time. Thales could see stars and his vision blurred. Both of Uraraka's hands pressed on the long hilt of the great axe. I like your axe. Thales vaguely heard the hearty laugh from Kingdom's Wrath, and Lirok's angry howl of despair. When he raised his head again, he could see Uraraka waving Lirok's double-sided axe valiantly, then slammed it into the face of its original owner. The latter flew off like a kite with a broken string. With his face covered in blood, Uraraka brandished the great axe and yelled at the comrades behind of him, "Follow me." Uraraka waved the double-sided axe and barged into the crowd before him like a fierce beast, slaughtering a bloody path through. Everywhere he went, the blood splattered in all directions and body parts flew in the air. The surrounding extensions began to become chaotic after witnessing their commander's death and the ferocious anger of the Kingdom's Wrath. But in the next second, the body of the Kingdom's Wrath suddenly swayed. He planted his axe on the ground and glared at the extensions before him while he panted. The extensions still stood in their orderly rows with hesitation on their faces. Thales was quite shocked. "Hey, Baron Merc, are you still strong enough to hold on?" "This is only an attack at a formation of light infantry," Uraraka panted laboriously and replied with dissatisfaction, "I have to go so far as to use this toy. If only I was 10 years, no, 5 years younger." Thales was momentarily stunned. Right at this very moment, a cold metallic sensation, one so cold he had never felt it before, went through his senses. It was the bow Uraraka carried on his back. Following Uraraka's words, the great, silver-black bow pressed against Thales' skin suddenly began to vibrate. The boy quivered. In that instant, Thales suddenly felt a burning sensation erupt from within his body, just like the great bow that suddenly had a faint electric current passing through it. As if it was repelling his touch. In the next instant, the exhausted Uraraka took a deep breath and his entire frame started to shake. Extit's infantryman stared at the Kingdom's Wrath in disbelief when he slowly stood up and waved the great axe with ease, as if his energy was once again replenished. Let them reminisce the good old days. Uraraka revealed a scary smile as he stared at his enemies, who wore complicated emotions on their faces. That uncomfortable feeling that was like an electric shock slowly disappeared from Thales' body. Thales endured the uncomfortable feeling caused by the great bow and asked, "What is this?" Uraraka exercised his neck and, once more, revealed his murderous spirit to the enemy. "This is the most unbelievable weapon in the entire world," he grinned as he said, "each weapon will bestow its user their corresponding powers." Thales was surprised, then he scrutinized that silver-black, metallic great bow again. The legendary anti-mystic equipment. He suddenly realized that this bow did not have a bowstring. Right, the Kingdom's Wrath nodded, motionless bow. Then, what is its ability? Thales asked in puzzlement, even though he already had the answer in his head while watching Uraraka's physical strength return to him like a phoenix rising from ashes. He only heard Uraraka snorting. Perpetual motion. Thales was slightly stunned. After he understood the meaning of this word, his expression changed drastically. Perpetual motion, if it is the literal meaning, that is too ridiculous. Memories from the past suddenly emerged in his mind. Archers always die. Hey, what does that mean? Oh, Master Kirin, who only has the heart to study the 4 books and 5 classics 1, is going to join the world of anime, too. Come here, I have an amazing piece that I want to introduce to you because of what you said just now, it is a story about the love-hate relationship between a master and his servant too. I'm just a little curious after reading this post. Hey, you don't snatch my mouse from me. Thales shook his head and forcefully suppressed the flickering memories, as well as the nausea caused by the smell of blood on the battlefield, back inside himself. Gennard finished off his opponent and pulled up the exhausted Willow. Each of them stood on either side of Araka. Ralph followed behind them with a complicated expression on his face. Lirok's death brought chaos to this large Extachian troop. The Fury Guards also finally broke from the infantry's entanglement. Hey, the brat with the twin pikes. Araka suddenly turned his head around and looked at Willow. Willow shuddered suddenly. 3 days ago, this man wanted to send him up to the scaffold. It seems that you truly are not an army deserter. Araka snorted lightly. Willow's face became joyful. But your skills in dual-wielding pikes are rubbish. Willow's expression froze. Do not mind it. Thales gave him a smile from behind Araka. This is his way of saying, thank you. Araka snorted coolly as he swung the great axe and walked forward with large, quick strides. Next time you should switch to a long pike and a short one. The Kingdom's Wrath voice came from the front. Even-length pikes are much too foolish. Willow was stunned, but a smile immediately spread across his face. He followed them immediately. Already, the Extachians before them were not as dense as before. Lampard's military camp was just a small distance away. Ellipsis. A member of the Fury Guards howled in anger as he stabbed his sword into the body of a soldier of Extat who was beside Araka. At the same time, he pulled an axe out from his lower abdomen. He panted twice before he glanced at Araka powerlessly, then fell to the ground. Araka trembled slightly, but he still broke through the last line of enemies without looking back. The surviving Fury Guards and members of the diplomat group finally made their way out of the siege. It was as if the light infantrymen behind them had received some command and did not pursue them anymore once they managed to break through the encirclement. They could already see the thick mass of the Lampard family's army before their eyes. Thales had hardly recovered from his shock when he raised his head. Araka threw Lirok's axe from his hand, and ripped the rope that was fastened around Thales when he asked quietly, "Are you sure that this is our chance? We must make a bet." Thales landed on the ground and felt the change in his balance. He retched for a moment. "Bet that Lampard does not dare to kill me. The stake is my life." However, he was immediately lifted up by Araka and placed back on Araka's back. Araka then continued to move forward. Poutre's body was covered entirely in blood when he hurried to them from behind. He rushed as he said exhaustedly, "At least Lady Caesar does not have to hesitate between you and the fortress anymore, Your Highness." Thales grasped Araka's shoulders and nodded. He turned his head around and suddenly saw Ramon, who was still in the troop. "He is still alive." Thales furrowed his brows. "Yes, even though I saw him in grave danger a few times. But each time, his luck had been pretty good," Poutre said with an apologetic expression on his face. Thales exhaled and stared at Ramon, whose face showed that he still had lingering fear from earlier. "I knew it." Poutre continued, "but the Fury Guards have had substantial damage, and almost half of the diplomat group's veterans were sacrificed." Thales' face darkened. He suddenly felt Araka's body tremble while carrying him. "You had better be right, young prince." Araka's tone was shaky as he spoke in a low and deep voice, "because of you alone." He turned his head around with an ill expression on his face and looked at the scarred soldiers and the numerous corpses behind them. Thales also turned his head around and stared at the path Araka had broken through. From there to here, there was an almost straight line of the dead bodies of the Fury Guards. 3 days ago, they held their sword hilts with serious expressions on their faces in a tense confrontation with Sonia and her Starlight Brigade at the fortress. 3 days later, they will never return. "You want me to prove to you that I am the most valiant warrior of Constellation?" Araka said in a low voice. Thales was stupefied. Araka furrowed his brows and his breathing sped up. "This is the proof. I was never the Kingdom's Wrath, there was only the Fury Guards and their sacrifices." Araka turned his head around and continued to carry the stunned Thales onwards. The Iron Fist flag was just a short distance away from them. "Done, Losa, Jillian, Perland." Araka shouted one name after another through clenched teeth. "Without them, I would have already died 10,000 times. Since the past, the present, and the future, all the members of the guards who gave up their lives, they are the true Kingdom's Wrath." Thales lowered his head with a complicated expression. "Right at this very moment." "Wait," Araka suddenly yelled. Thales was startled and immediately raised his head. From one side of Extat's military camp, a troop of soldiers, with very few members but were armed heavily, were seen walking out in an orderly manner ahead of them. Everyone also raised their heads to look in front. The survivors from Constellation suddenly burst into an uproar. Almost everyone was shocked. "Damn it!" Ida punched her fist at Poutre and said angrily, "What exactly did you do?" "Do what? No." Poutre stared at the troop in bewilderment. "Everything that happened today is not right. It should not be like this." Ramon screamed and threw himself onto the ground. "I knew it. To follow this prince is simply..." Wya was terror-stricken and rushed towards Thales. Your Highness, please seek cover immediately. Ralph was nervous and seemingly out of his wits. He kept shaking his head. In the crowd, Willow poked Gennard beside him with a strange expression on his face. What is that? What is that? Gennard also furrowed his brows while he harshly replied, the ferryman of Hell's River. Willow shook his head with a dumbfounded look on his face. On the other hand, Thales looked at everyone with a confused expression on his face. What is going on? That troop of sparse soldiers. Arched light shield. Uraka placed Thales down and roared frantically, form a formation immediately. Adjust the angle of deviation. Every soldier of Constellation began moving frantically. The Fury guards in the fortress, veterans rapidly took the shields from their backs, especially the shields that glinted with a metallic sheen. The soldiers arranged themselves into a battle array with different layers, they then raised their shields in front of themselves. Even though it was tradition to use the infantry battle formation that Constellation had inherited from the Empire, it was different from the usual array. This time, the battle formation was particularly concentrated. There was only one row where the soldiers were either squatting or standing. They stuck tightly together while facing the direction of the small, peculiar troop of extant soldiers. While he watched the situation, Thales asked aloud because he was unaware, what is happening? Who exactly are those soldiers? Everyone suddenly fell silent. Uraka broke the silence and asked through clenched teeth, you said you bet that Lampod does not dare to kill you. Thales looked at Uraka's complexion in bewilderment. It seems that this is a failed gamble. Uraka wore an angry expression on his face as he pointed at the troop of soldiers in the distance. Do you see the ones coming to greet us? Thales narrowed his eyes. He suddenly realized that the soldiers were holding peculiar but heavy long strips in their hands. They placed one hand on the front and another on the back as they aimed one end of the long strip at them. This position, his heart suddenly trembled. He could hear Uraka's low roar as the man forcefully suppressed his anger. That is, the Mystic Gun Unit. Translator's note. 1. 4 books and 5 classics, the authoritative books of Confucianism in China. 2. Master and Servants, from the Fate Stay series, all of them. Chapter 107 Mystic Gun. Prepare to hoist the guns. A man with the left half of his face burnt, shouted loudly. As the training officer of Black Sand Region's Mystic Gun Unit, Hadal watched his subordinates in satisfaction. There were almost 30 strong and elite soldiers. They were wearing heat insulation gloves as well as glass goggles, and were divided into groups of 3. They opened the maintenance box and steadily took out 10 streamlined iron ash mystic guns. Although they were not the best mystic gunmen he had ever trained, in a place like Extat, which generally looked down on the usage of mystic guns, these men that belonged to the Black Sand Archduke were considered rare professionals. This reminded Hadal of his first time touching an old-fashioned and depleted Seagull 5 mystic gun as a new recruit. But look at these young men. Hadal sighed, filled with emotions. Look at those playthings in their hands. The Seagull 7 mystic gun's sturdy frame was smelted by skilled dwarves in the eastern peninsula's Iron Ash Hill. Its barrel was forged with carefully selected crystal drop ores from the Snake Belly Mountain Range, which was situated at the intersection of Hanbal Dynasty and Liegdern Union. Its oil storage tank was made of dark copper extracted from Crystal Jade City's seabed. It was also filled to the brim with high-quality eternal whale oil harvested by the Trade Federation from the Southern Sea of Eradication. Not to mention, there was also a sealed-up core of mysterious origins inserted inside. The body of the gun was sturdy and wearproof. Plus, the barrel could withstand high temperatures. It had a high focal power and was easy to aim with. Even the rate in which the core depleted was only half of its preceding model, the Seagull 6, which came out 20 years ago. Its mystic energy could cover 200 meters without dispersing. It could also be fired twice within half an hour, and only needed 2 hours to cool down. Apart from the fact that its net weight was still exasperatingly heavy and that it had a problem with leaking heat, it was virtually perfect in Hadal's eyes. Low-quality mystic guns would be smuggled dubiously into the underground black market from the kingdom's firearm trade, but they lack maintenance and upkeep. Additionally, their core would deplete after a few months. Compared to this, it was virtually a comparison between wooden sticks and steel swords. The target is within our vision. Prepare to aim. A well-built hoister kneeled on one knee and lifted the heat insulation base at the front part of the gun with his shoulder, which was clad in special armor. A sagacious Ame quickly calculated the direction and distance they were working with. He turned the knob on the side of the gun, adjusting the focal point and the degree of energy. Then, a resolute operator skillfully checked the condition of the gun. After ensuring that the core was stable, he opened the safety latch and grabbed onto the firing handle. One day, Hadal thought quietly, it will not be heavy anymore. And 2 people, or even 1 person would be able to carry it by hand. It will not be complicated anymore either. 1 person would be enough to aim accurately and fire. It will also not be dangerous anymore. The core will no longer be a ticking time bomb that could endanger the gunman's life at any moment. It will not be expensive anymore, and every soldier will be equipped with it in the battlefield, instead of having the need for it to wielded by a unit consisting of dozens of people. It will not be mysterious anymore. The core will no longer be a mysterious item, which can only be replenished through special channels. Every single person will know its origins and the principles behind it. One day, Thales looked gently at the mystic gun next to him, which was in firing mode. He subconsciously ran his hand over his severed left arm. Feeling the left side of his face, which was throbbing in slight pain, he thought to himself. It will become the king of battles and take away the glory of the powers of eradication. It will completely eliminate metal weapons and hand-to-hand combat from the world. Even in the Northland. It will show people the high price they have to pay for war, and how precious peace is. Unfortunately, I will not be able to see it anymore. Get into attacking position. Thales raised his right hand solemnly and yelled out the penultimate call. The 10 gunmen put forth their strength and pulled the handles, which were attached to internal springs. The mysterious core behind the frame of the gun started to emit unsettling vibrations and noises. Thales looked at the constellations in front of him, who just broke out of the light infantry's encirclement. It is said that their newfound prince is in there. Is he? Thales flashed a smile. Lucy, my daughter. Your mother and I will always be proud of you. No matter how hopeless the situation gets, you must live on with strength. This man had gone through the many vicissitudes of life, and on top of that, he only had half a face. At the very next moment, he thumped his right arm with force. And with a distorted expression, he roared furiously. Fire! The soldiers formed a dense shield formation and blocked most of Thales' field of vision. All the remaining people hid behind the shield formation. Distribute the arched light shield evenly. Baraka roared furiously, do not leave any area uncovered. On the other hand, Thales was pressed onto the ground while he was under Putre. He could not raise his head at all. No matter what, hide yourself behind other people, Putre said with a stiff expression. Lampod must have gone crazy. Gritting his teeth, Thales could not suppress the curiosity inside his heart. Are those mystic guns? He remembered that not long ago, Morris from the Brotherhood obtained 2 of those guns from the army with a high price. However, they were proven as unrealistic playthings. At least, that was what Lairk said. Thales had always assumed that apart from the fact that it used a mysterious source of energy, the mystic gun was a weapon similar to that of his past life, one that could be pointed and shot at the enemy. However, seeing them now, they seemed to be more complicated. Gauging from Araka's expression and the others, at least, they look like they are facing an arch-enemy. It probably. They have fired. At this moment, Araka shouted in a frenzy. All the soldiers gritted their teeth and trembled, grasping the metallic arch light shields in their hands even tighter. A blood-red light shone from the front. The light pierced through the shield formation. The weather was very cold. However, at this moment, a gentle warmth enveloped them, as if they were basking in the sun. Endure and disperse it. Before Araka could finish his words, there was an odd change in their surroundings. Sizzle. The moment the snow-covered ground beside them touched the red light, the snow melted into water and evaporated into the air. Thales furrowed his brows. What is this? The red light spread to a tiny tree on the snow-covered ground. Thales' eyes widened and his jaw dropped as every inch of the tree turned black in the blink of an eye, bursting into flames. Shortly after, the tiny tree exploded abruptly and countless sparks flew everywhere. Boom! Asterisk. The spattering sparks hit the crowd and many of the soldiers wailed in pain. The shield formation immediately shook. Persist, Baraka roared. 10 seconds would roughly be enough. Panicking, Thales felt the air around him continuously increasing in temperature. It was getting hotter and hotter. To the point where the warmth became a merciless, blazing heat. His body temperature was also rising along with it. What is happening? Thales thought in a panic. What on earth are mystic guns? Why do they have such an effect? We can't. The heat from the shield, a veteran of the Fury Guards blocked the light with his shield. The clothes on his shoulder where the shield was being held up had started to blacken and crimple, emitting smoke. He shut his eyes tightly and said as he trembled, at least 5 are firing at us at the same time. We do not have enough anti-mystic equipment, the arch-light shields. You must persist. Baraka roared loudly and removed the motionless bow from his back. It was a bow without strings. I will fend off the extra attacks. Just then, the hand of one of the soldiers holding an arch-light shield suddenly burst into flames. He started to shout in agony and took a step back under Araka's shocked gaze. His shield swayed, and the red light shone on his body through the gap in the shield formation. No, before Araka could finish, the soldier started to wail miserably. Arg! Within a few seconds, the soldier began to tremble tremendously. His clothes were the first to sizzle with smoke. The red light shone onto the area beneath his legs, and the snow there evaporated into gas in the blink of an eye. Feeling his skin crawl, Thales watched as the soldier's skin started to melt. The next moment, the soldier's entire body burst into flames. After another second, just like the tiny tree, the soldier's entire body exploded and released numerous sparks. Boom! Asterisk. Thales watched in horror as the soldier's life ended. Only a dried, dead body was left of the soldier. However, his death brought about irredeemable consequences. Cover the gap. Before Araka could finish yelling, the scorching fragments of the dead body splattered around within the shield formation and lit many of the shield-wielding soldiers on fire. Arg. No. Endure. It's so hot. Cries of pain rang out one after another. The shield formation scattered immediately. Then, the red light shone into the crowd without any barriers. The temperature increased abruptly and quickly. And so, the snow began to evaporate inch by inch. A chill ran down Thales' spine. No. *T. At that moment, Araka stood up as he roared furiously. He dashed forward and shielded everyone behind him. With the sound of an explosion, his hair caught fire instantly. The kingdom's wrath raised his motionless bow towards the source of the red light, where a small group of extant soldiers stood. The motionless bow shook a little. It then emitted a strong, silver light, which was nothing less than the mystic gun's firing attack. Meeting with the silver light, the red light from the mystic gun weakened and scattered all over its surroundings. It was as if the silver light had blocked the path of the mystic gun's red light. Araka roared. Smoke started to emanate from his right hand, which was holding the motionless bow. Despite that, he still persisted. However, the surface area of the silver light was not big enough and Araka could only shield the people who were at the center. There were still many soldiers at his periphery who were being hit by the red light. Boom. Asterisk. A second soldier turned into a large fireball and exploded. No, no, no. Boom. Asterisk. A third one exploded. Arg, arg, arg. Gennard held his right shoulder, which had been hit by the red light. He was dragged towards the silver light's area of protection by Willow. In the process, the Willow's short pike abruptly burst into numerous fiery sparks. He will not be able to keep going for much longer. Gritting her teeth, Ida yelled. I cannot die here, Ramon said. Take His Highness and get out, Wya said while drenched in sweat. No, there are too many mystic guns. We cannot get out, Poutre said with difficulty. Everyone was caught up in a chaotic mess and no one noticed that the second prince of Constellation was in a peculiar state. The moment the silver light emanated from the motionless bow, Thales felt the electric sensation again. And it was more severe than what he felt when he was on Araka's back moments earlier. It was as if the metallic bow repelled every inch of his body. Lying face down on the snow-covered ground, Thales quivered with a distorted expression. No, does the legendary anti-mystic equipment really repel me this much? The silver light weakened suddenly. Araka's right hand started combusting. The kingdom's wrath gritted his teeth, enduring the endless heat and the high temperature. A few slivers of red light snuck through and shone on Thales' body. At that moment, Thales suddenly trembled and his clothes began to smoke. He could only feel the cells in his body increasing in temperature. It is so hot. As if I am burning from the inside out. The familiar fluctuation surged throughout his entire body and it was like time had slowed down again. Via the field of vision he obtained through the fluctuation, the red light and the silver light looked like two garroting enemies that were swallowing each other up. However, apart from the places where the two lights converged, the silver light obviously had the upper hand. It was just that there was more red light. But at the same time, Thales could only feel the inside of his body getting hotter and hotter. No. It's so hot. Feeling the heat that was almost burning him up, Thales shut his eyes in despair and screamed with his mouth wide open. He flailed his arms and wailed miserably. Arg, it's too hot. Just then, his heart suddenly jumped. ***. He felt a very new sensation. That time, Thales only noticed that his vision had transcended normal distances. He saw the red light's point of departure, the mystic guns those soldiers were holding. There was a core that emitted yellow light and rotated continuously behind each of one of those guns. That is the essence of the mystic gun. But this ***MNED red light, please, disappear quickly. It's so hot. At least. Stay farther away from me. He pondered about it for a moment. Shortly after, with the vision he obtained through the mysterious fluctuation, he suddenly saw something that would shake his world. In his field of vision, which others could not see, the blood-red light of the mystic gun suddenly dispersed as if it had gained consciousness. It avoided the constellations and shone at the area behind their backs. Sizzle, sizzle. On the ground a few hundred meters behind the constellations, the snow evaporated in the blink of an eye. Next, the red light fired by the mystic guns disappeared from everyone's vision. Araka kneeled on the ground with a thud. However, he still had his right hand raised as it was on fire. He extinguished the flames on the top of his hand and on his hand. The constellations heaved a sigh of relief and plopped to the ground. Amid the blazing air, many soldiers had become charred dead bodies while some were burned alive. Gritting his teeth, Araka got up from the ground and said, "The first round of attack has ended." It seemed like their aim was not very accurate, but if they are using the Seagull 7. At this moment, a shrill trumpet sound rang through the air. Toot. Araka furrowed his brows. Poutre and the other veterans shivered all of a sudden. We have lived. Putre, who just survived the disaster, shut his eyes tightly. His lips were quivering. This is Extit's retreat bugle. Rapid sounds of hooves rang from afar. A knight wearing a grey helmet hurried over. Enough. The kingdom's wrath, there has already been enough battles and deaths. The knight with the grey helmet shouted from afar. Uraka raised his head and laughed in a mocking tone. Toldja, the Fire Knight. Come. He raised his almost charred right hand with the motionless bow in its grasp. The bow was almost brand new. Clenching his teeth, he said, come and get it. Over my dead body. Come and get the motionless bow I snatched from all of you 12 years ago. The battle between us had ended. The grim-looking Lord Toldja sat on his steed and said with dissatisfaction, one of Extit's 10 joint rulers, the Honorable Archduke of the Black Sand region, Sir Chapman Lampod, has invited the second Prince of Constellation, Thales Jadastar, for a visit. Uraka was stunned. Is this a joke? At this moment, Putre screamed in shock, Your Highness. Thales did not know what happened after that. He only felt one thing. Pain. A numbing pain. It was so painful that he felt numb. This was an aftereffect of the previous time he lost control. It had returned. The intense pain exploded throughout his entire body in waves. It was more severe than the previous time. It felt like every single particle in his body was splitting and disintegrating, passing on the pain to every nerve. What is happening to him? Thales tried his best to open his eyes. He saw a knight wearing a grey helmet a distance away, as well as Uraka, who was in front of him, and had on a vigilant expression. Maybe he has run out of strength. After such a journey, Putre said anxiously. Oh God, His Highness is bleeding. No, his breathing is getting faint. Wya panicked. Where is that doctor? Ask him to come. Before Thales lost consciousness, the last thing he saw was Ralph, who was dashing anxiously towards him, and Ramon, who was being dragged over by Ida. Those two voices again. It feels like I am dreaming, Thales thought in a daze. Perhaps, I will forget this after I wake up. Oh, it's this one again. How long has it even been? A few minutes. Oh, never mind, it can finally stay here this time, can't it? Although the buoyancy of the soul is still strong, I can feel that the human body is almost collapsing. Wait. Someone up there is stimulating the potential within its body and mending its life, and it appears that its vitality is very exuberant, too exuberant. This cannot be. When was the last time we met such a tough fellow? A few thousand years ago? A few hundred years ago? Or was it a couple of dozen years ago? I cannot remember clearly. I think it was that arrogant knight cum wizard. What does Mother think? Mother is still not willing to take it in. I can only say that it is a good thing to have an exuberant vitality. Even Mother allowed it to slip through the net. There is no use in thinking too much. Mother has her own plans. Speaking of vitality, do you still remember the Deep Pool Sovereign? It even had 3 of its hearts destroyed continuously by that calamity. That screech, even we could hear it clearly from the bottommost floor. Mother actually wanted to take it in. Turns out it struggled and climbed back up. Silence. Prepare to open the counter-current gate, it is rising back up. Hiya, hopefully the next time it comes down, it won't rise back up again. In a dingy grove of an unknown location. A delicate maiden slowly rose from under a tree. I thought Helen would be the one to arrive first. The blood mystic, Giza Streelman, flashed a smile. She spoke in a soft voice without turning her head back. After all, I created such a huge commotion. After so many years, it appears that she has become lazy. As soon as she finished talking, a man walked out slowly from the grove behind her. Do you know who I am? Giza smiled adorably and stroked her hair. The man did not say a word. If you know, why would you dare to follow me all the way here? Giza smiled and turned. The man was still silent, as if he did not hear her. He was an extremely plain man, no matter which angle you looked at him from. He had a plain appearance, plain attire, plain build, and a plain aura. It was very hard for him to leave an impression on anyone. That is, apart from what was on the left side of his waist. 2 weapons were tied onto his belt. One of the weapons was wrapped in an old sackcloth and seemed to be cylindrical in shape. Giza furrowed her brows slightly. She could feel a detestable vice under the sackcloth. And the man's other weapon looked like a sword. It was just that its shape was quite irregular. The man was still expressionless. However, he began to move. He held the uneven sword at his waist in a backhanded manner. And took it out slowly. Are you sure you want to use a sword to fight against me? Giza exhaled softly. You do not look like the civilians around here. The man still did not say anything. He just raised his sword without changing his expression. It was like he was doing the most insignificant thing ever. Giza smiled slightly. The next moment, she saw the sword in the man's hand clearly. That sword. The blood mystic's face became slightly grim. It was a strange sword. More importantly, it was a strange sword that was entirely black. From its hilt all the way to its blade. Chapter 108. Chapman Lampod. Alright, he's awake. Thales woke up among the chaotic crowd, and when he opened his eyes, he saw Raymond's huge nose. What happened just now? The mystic gun shot me. And I lost control, again. He panted. Ramon was pushed out of his field of vision, after which Putre's thin face, Yaya's anxious expression, and Ida's cloaked face squeezed into his field of vision. What is wrong? Thales asked, without any hint of strength in his voice. Move, move, respect the doctor. Raymond's annoyed voice traveled into his ears from the side. Give us some space, His Highness still needs further inspection. The three faces in his field of vision disappeared, and Raymond's huge nose reappeared in front of his eyes again. What happened to me? Thales regained his senses over his entire body and asked softly. You are currently in great condition. Truthfully, a normal person would not have your vitality and regenerative abilities. The disheveled-looking Ramon frowned and said. But, your body. All right. Thales cut him off and struggled to sit up. He exercised his right shoulder and observed his surroundings. This is not the time for us to say such things. Ramon had clearly sensed the abnormalities in his body, but how could they talk about it in this place? However, Ramon did not seem like he wanted to give up on it, and his next words caused Thales to clench his fists tightly. As Ramon dressed his shoulder, which he had injured during the chaotic battle, he hissed with his teeth clenched, Listen, Your Highness, others may not know, but I can sense it. Those mystic guns did not miss their target, but you did something to make them miss. What? Thales did his best to control his shock so that he would not appear to be too surprised. What does he know? Thales retorted brusquely, I do not know what you are talking about. I should get up now, tell them their prince is fine. However, Ramon continued chattering away with a displeased expression on his face. It does not matter if it was a psionic ability or not, judging from their expressions, I guess this is not something the others know. But no matter, I am not interested in your secret. Just one thing. He lowered his head and said in a fierce tone, When we reach the border, let me go. I will not join you in your damn journey anymore, or else. Or else what? Thales turned his head around swiftly and glared at him. You will use that resurrective power of yours to deal with me. Ramon was slightly taken aback. Thales hissed coldly, You are not a doctor, Ramon. That's right, I know about this very clearly. You used another power to cure people. I assume this is something not everyone knows about as well, am I right? He looked at the disbelieving expression on Raymond's face and tapped his forehead. We shall talk about this later. Thales stood up, leaving behind Ramon, who was completely stupefied. The mystic gun unit in the distance had already withdrawn. The Fury Guards were cleaning up the battlefield and binding the corpses of their comrades with ropes. Grief and anger appeared on each and every single one of their faces. Damn it. Thales sighed and clenched his fist. If this is the sort of thing I have to face in the future. Damn it. He lifted his head. Lampard's military camp was right before his eyes. What happened? Thales walked up to Putre with much difficulty and gestured with his hand to signal that he was fine. After their first failure, they withdrew. Putre frowned and looked at Thales. Are you sure you are well? I am fine, just a little weak. I feel fine now, Thales answered with a tone that left no room for any argument. Just what are mystic guns? Thales held his chest and asked with fear lingering in his heart. A powerful weapon for attacking and defending cities. Putre shook his head. However, the price for the materials needed to produce every single shot is incredibly expensive. In addition, those materials are hard to get as well. It has low efficiency. No, that is not right. It is not that simple, I can tell just based on its strange name and its mysterious working principles, Thales thought to himself. Pardon me for being frank, Your Highness, but are you really alright? You stopped breathing just now. Wya shook his head in worry and walked to his side. I told you, I am fine. Thales cut him off coldly. We have more important things to do. Wya frowned. This is a secret I have to keep. I'm sorry. With regret in his heart for his actions towards Wya, Thales lifted his head and looked ahead. Who is that? Thales narrowed his eyes. Not too far away was Araka, covered in wounds from head to toe. He was glaring at a knight who was wearing a grey helmet and riding on a horse. Putre said with a wary tone, one of Extit's 5 war generals, the Fire Knight, Rommel Tolja, wielder of the legendary anti-mystic equipment, Rising Sun Saber. Lampard sent him alone here. It seems like he is here to make peace. Putre shook his head. If Lampard had truly gone mad and wanted to kill us all, why did he give up halfway? That's right. In the end, Lampard has no reason to kill me. Then, why? Putre said slowly, nonetheless, we have already progressed up to this point. We cannot turn back. Thales nodded slightly. You are Prince Thales. Tolja saw Thales from the distance. The knight in the grey helmet cast a wary look at Araka while he spoke slowly, I am Rommel Tolja. Sir Chapman Lampard has extended an invitation to meet with you. Thales sighed and strode over. The Archduke of Black Sand, I originally thought that he would be more amicable. Thales looked around and saw the burnt corpses as well as injured soldiers and members of the diplomat group covered in wounds. As he looked at them, he forced down the displeasure in his heart. I did not expect him to kill most of our people and then put up a farce by extending an invitation to us. Tolja raised his head and cast a glance at Broken Dragon Fortress, located in the distance. If you have any opinions regarding this matter, you can bring them up to the Archduke. The Fire Knight's eyes were sharp and profound under his grey helmet. I am only responsible of bringing you to him. Thales gritted his teeth and exhaled. Right at that moment, the ferocious Araka stormed towards Tolja. Have you forgotten something, Extichian? There was anger in the words spoken by the kingdom's wrath. As for you, Araka, you are not included. Go back. Tolja looked at the hostile kingdom's wrath and steered his horse into another direction. The Archduke does not welcome you, neither you, nor your guards. You are only here to escort the prince, no. Araka hissed furiously. Lampad does not welcome me. What a joke. His brother died in his hands, and his father died in my hands. With this similarity between us, we should be able to get along very well. Thales frowned. Araka said with a freezing tone, especially since I killed so many of his soldiers and he killed so many of mine, we would surely become good friends. The battle has ended, and you cannot change the results, Tolja responded nonchalantly, as if he was already used to Araka's provocations. Those who died in battle should be remembered, true, but those who are alive should not forget their mission. What is your mission, Araka? Araka lowered his head and looked at a burnt corpse not too far away, bound by a tow rope made on the spot. He clenched his fists even harder. All of you fought very courageously, but you have already completed your duty. Tolja looked at his opponent coldly. You should be grateful we did not use this chance to seize the motionless bow. Why don't you try? Araka grabbed the motionless bow in one fierce move and slammed one end of the bow in the snow. After all, you brought that saber along, didn't you? One of these days, I will. A brilliant glare shone in Tolja's eyes. He shook his head, but now is not the time. He continued slowly, one of these days, we will clear all the blood debts between us. Araka glared at him, then let out a cold chuckle, which made others uneasy. Your Highness, Tolja did not look at Araka any longer. He gave Thales a brief nod on his horse and extended his arm in the direction of the military camp. Thales looked at Putre and the latter gave him a supportive glance. I suppose we do not have a choice, do we? Thales looked at the knight in the grey helmet with the latter giving him a faint smile. All right, Thales looked at the disorganized battlefield and exhaled before he took a step forward. Let us meet the organizer of this welcoming party. Thales cast a glance at Araka, whose expression was difficult to read at this point. Thank you, Baron Merk. And all of you as well, all of the kingdom's wrath. Thales added after a moment of hesitation. Araka did not answer, he only watched his guards as they cleaned up the battlefield silently. Thales sighed and shook his head, he then turned around and walked towards the military camp. Putre was the first to follow Thales. Wya and Ralph followed closely behind, and as for Ida, she cast a glance at the corpses around her before she walked at the back of the group. Willow supported Gennard and followed suit. As for Ramon, after being pushed and shoved by a few soldiers, he followed them in displeasure. Boy! Thales turned his head around in surprise. Right before his eyes, he saw Araka dipping his head down and placing the motionless bow on his back. The kingdom's wrath said quietly, most of the soldiers under my command and your diplomat group have died, just so that we could send you here. Araka Merk lifted his head, and he displayed an emotion that Thales could not read. Do not let them die in vain. Thales was stunned. However, the kingdom's wrath had already turned around. Araka grabbed a length of rope and dragged the corpses of 5 of his soldiers, trudging back on the path he used to come to this place without turning back. The remaining Fury guards followed behind him, along with their comrades' corpses, which were dragged along the snow-covered ground. Some were complete while some were incomplete. Their backs were filled with a desolate air. Extit's military camp was boorish and crude. The walls of the camp were made with trees from the pine forest and it was done up in a simple fashion. The tents where the soldiers rested were made using thick branches, yet compared to these, what left a deep impression in Thales, were the soldiers of Extit. They were simply too passionate. Thales even suspected that if it was not for Tolja leading with his horse in front of the group to show them the way, those soldiers from Extit would have pounced on them. The Extit soldiers on garrison duty cast a hostile glance at the group from Constellation, and a sentinel even spat fiercely at his feet. A group of cavaliers who just returned to the camp passed by them. When they saw the Constellation flags lifted high above their heads, they cackled provocatively at the group. An Extit soldier carrying a suit of heavy armor and a great sword shouted hatefully at the diplomat group. Go back, you Southerners. The Northland does not welcome the people of the Empire. Keep on living in your dreams of the Empire. A half-naked man thumped his chest and roared. He was sitting by a fire while wetting his great axe. But first, give us back our territory. The Northland only belongs to Northerners. They killed our prince, but asked a child to make peace. There was a group of soldiers sitting in a circle to their left as they walked by. The leader of the group pointed at the diplomat group and shouted, "This is how shameless the Empire is." The people around them voiced their agreements in anger and glared at them. That soldier shouted, "Do you know why? Because all their men in their country were killed by us 12 years ago." The people by his side roared in laughter and chimed in. They should have sent a princess here. A soldier mocked, "A boy would do just as well, as long as he's pretty enough. We don't mind the holes in front or at the back." Another loud burst of laughter rang in the air. Thales lifted his head and sighed, "Should I be surprised? Or is this how the citizens of Extit greet those from Constellation?" "Do not be surprised, your highness," said Putre in a relaxed manner to Thales, whose expression had gone stiff. "Constellation and Extit's relationship has been bad over the past 600 years, ever since we built our countries. It does not matter if it is the Empire's history or the fight over the Western Peninsula, each is reason enough to turn us into enemies. We seized the cold castle from Extit's hands 400 years ago. The earliest periods of our history brewed our hatred of each other, and that hate continued to write history." Putre sighed. "Only the Peninsular War could make us temporarily forget our opinions of each other and fight together, an occasion that is rarely seen. During the Third Peninsular War, Chara the hero and the Oathkeeper Midir were bosom friends. Together with Camus Union's Kaplan the Prophet, they fought together with a united heart against the expeditionary forces from the Eastern Peninsula. But alas, in the end, they became enemies, and an excellent chance for the Dragon and Constellation to repair their relationship was lost, just like that. But this is a military camp. It will be much better in other places. Plenty of Northlanders do not care about these insubstantial things." Wya nodded. "The civilians who are busy earning their living are different from soldiers who have their hands stained with blood." "Why did they call us people from the Empire?" Thales frowned. "Is the final Empire not a historical relic from an age more than 600 years ago? Even if we truly have a grudge against each other, do we have to trace it back to the ancient empire more than 1,000 years ago?" Putre shook his head and said with a complicated expression, "This is their way of mocking us. Constellations have always been proud of our legacy and of having the blood of the empire flowing in our veins, but alas, the empire did not leave a good impression on the world. This is not just limited to the Northlanders. Columbia of the Land of Thorns and Anlenzo Dukedom of Dragon's Kiss Basin have bad impressions of us too. This is because, for example, every single time we need to go to war, we would play up and exaggerate the ancient friendship between us, which lasted for generations. This is more effective than increasing the rewards for the soldiers. The Empire, people from the Empire." Thales sighed and stored that piece of information in his mind. "Speaking of which, mobilizing about 10,000 soldiers seems to be the Archduke of Black Sand's limit." Putre looked at the densely packed military camp. "I believe Lampod has a lot of difficulty dealing with restocking and expenditures. Black Sand region is not a place that is rich in resources. For the Northern Territory, they must have planned this for a long time and spent a lot of money on this as well." The Constellations finally arrived before a huge tent as they followed Tolja. A tall noble dressed in military uniform had been waiting in front of the tent. He walked towards them and nodded slightly at Tolja. The tall noble bowed before Thales and said, "This must be Prince Thales. A pleasure to meet you. I am Lazar Kenvida, a Viscount of Extit, and my fiefdom is the city of Halting Light, located within Black Sand region. Members of the diplomat group, please come with me to rest. As for you, your highness," Viscount Kenvida nodded towards them, then looked at Thales, "the Archduke is waiting for you." Thales lifted his eyebrow. Kenvida looked at Thales with brightly shining eyes. "This is a private meeting between the Archduke of Black Sand and the Prince of Constellation. Do not worry." Viscount Kenvida lifted his hand and stopped Putre and Wya from speaking. His voice was firm. "His Highness is already here. At least, before he reaches Dragon Cloud City to pay a formal visit to His Majesty, no harm will come to him." Thales sighed softly and produced a smile on his lips. "I believe we still do not have much of a choice, do we?" Putre whispered softly and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. "You know, your highness, I suddenly came to a realization. Lampod is not mad." A thought occurred in Thales' heart. Kenvida frowned and gestured to Thales, motioning him to go forward. The Archduke's tent was incredibly tall and wide, but it was not bright. There was a thick carpet placed on the ground, and the picture of a strong iron fist was embroidered on it. On one side of a thick, square table, filled with food was a boorish man. He was in his 40s and had gray hair as well as blue eyes. His jaw was covered in a stubble, and he wore a meticulous chain armor made of ring hoops. He was eating from a plate of roasted meat on the table. A metal brazier was burning brightly by the side, illuminating the man's face. It gave him an even more mysterious look. Thales noticed that a saber with a leather scabbard was placed horizontally on the table. The scabbard had been polished to the point where it shone. He calmly watched the actual ruler of Black Sand region, Archduke Chapman Lampod. While Lampod brought another piece of roasted meat to his mouth, he fixed his eyes on Thales, causing him to feel uncomfortable. "You are calmer than I thought you would be," the Archduke remarked slowly. Thales sighed. "Perhaps." He walked to the table and climbed up a chair before he sat down. but in the face of my enemy who has formed a blood debt of several hundreds of lives, I truly cannot think of any other expression to show you, even anger seems excessive. Lampard picked up a wooden wine goblet and chugged the contents down his throat. His Adam's apple continued to move as he gulped down the wine. The Archduke put down the goblet and used his left hand to wipe off the wine that had flowed out. He then seized a drumstick to take a bite from it. Based on the news spreading around Constellation, you are truly not like a 7-year-old child. When you have a difficult life, you learn how to be mature at an earlier age. Thales shrugged. Eat, this is high-quality venison. Lampard pushed a plate of roasted meat towards him. The Prince of Constellation cannot die of starvation in my military camp. Thales looked at the crude-looking plate of roasted meat and frowned. You have guts. Breaking through in the opposite direction was indeed out of my expectations, Lampard said coldly. Who made this decision? Perhaps I should reward him for causing the plan I have concocted for years to be ruined in a day. You. Thales pulled the plate in front of him, and without even lifting his head, he brought out his dagger and started cutting into the meat. Lampard lifted his brows. Thales cut into the venison and said calmly, It was your decision, your grace. On the first day I stepped into Extit's borders, you killed half of my men, you forced us to choose a path that was the most disadvantageous to you. How long have you been standing around and watching the fortress across you? 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Let me take a guess, the money for supplies, and to keep 10,000-something men well fed as well as have a room over their heads is not that easy to maintain. Thales shrugged. I am truly worried over Black Sand Region's financial situation. He picked up a piece of venison that he had cut into the size of a thumb and delivered it to his mouth. The taste was good. Lampard no longer continued eating or drinking. He looked at Thales intently, and his gaze was fierce. The Archduke said slowly, Did you know that I originally intended to let you live and only kill those around you? Thales frowned. He did not cut the venison properly. Thales let out a cold harumph, and started cutting another piece of meat. However, we ran into the Mystic Gun unit. With that level of attack, you were aiming for my life, am I right? That was an accident, Lampard answered faintly. An accident? Thales was so angry that he let out a bark of laughter. He put down the dagger in his hand. Your mystic gun. Nonetheless, Thales hesitated at the next moment. Wait, Poutre said that Lampard isn't mad. Then. Thales looked at Lampard with a dumbfounded gaze. Could it be? That was an accident, Thales asked in disbelief. An accident. Lampard placed his arms on the table, and his eyes shone brightly. Thales closed his eyes and sighed deeply. After some time. You did not send out the Mystic Gun unit, Thales opened his eyes and said with certainty. I did not. Lampard put down the wine goblet and shook his head slowly. You also did not intend to kill me, Thales continued. I did not. Lampard's eyes sparkled. Thales clenched his teeth. I see. He exhaled and started laughing. Someone else instructed the Mystic Gun unit to attack me. Right from the start, Lampard had no reason to kill me. The Mystic Gun unit is an anti-personnel weapon that cannot be controlled. No matter how dumb he was, he would not have used that type of weapon to attack me. Thales sighed. Lampard seized the wooden plate where the venison was and dragged it before him. He then took a piece of venison. You are much smarter than I had imagined. Lampard's expression was as dark as thunderclouds. He put the venison in his mouth and narrowed his eyes a little. You understand the reason behind our meeting here, yes? Indeed, I understand now. Thales used his sleeve to wipe his dagger and put it back by his waist. He sighed again, but I truly never expected that the famous Black Sand Archduke would have his right of command over his Mystic Gun unit easily taken away by others. Lampard forced down his anger. That officer's name is Thales. He was tasked to train my Mystic Gun unit 3 years ago. The unit's commander was bedridden this morning, and he was only acting as a temporary commander. What happened to him? Thales asked quietly. Lampard said with a dark tone. Once the call to retreat was sounded, he still sent the order for the second round of attack, but right then, there were soldiers who got suspicious of his orders. Thales then slit his own throat without any hesitation. We are still unable to find the person who pulled the strings behind him. Thales said with a cold sneer, this also explains why you sounded the call to retreat so swiftly after the first round of attack. Even your commands did not work properly. I am sorry, I truly do not know what sort of response I should be giving you right now. Lampard pursed his lips and did not say a single word. Their goal was probably to kill me by using you, or perhaps to use my death to scheme against you. Thales sneered. I think the latter is more likely. My enemies are all in my own country. Lampard said quietly, the higher you stand, the more enemies you will gain. That is why this sudden accident made you cancel your plans. Thales snorted. Did you originally want to capture me and put me in a humiliating situation, just to see whether the fortress would be shaken? There was silence. Lampard uncorked a bottle of rye wine and filled his empty cup. Archduke Lampard said quietly, I hate to say it, but King Kessel has made a good move. He sent you out. The moment you stepped into my military camp, it became impossible for me to seize the fortress in the northern territory anymore. Lampard picked up his goblet and said quietly, and his oath in Renaissance Palace was equivalent to him forming an armor for you with his royal power. If you die in Extit, it would not matter who's responsible. Black Sand region will suffer, because we are neighbors. That is why once you discovered that you could not seize Broken Dragon Fortress, and there were actually other people eyeing you with hostility, you immediately changed your stance. After that, you intended to draw me to your side, Thales asked with a cold voice. Lampard took a big gulp from his goblet with an expressionless face and said, Kessel's oath caused a group of people to give up on the idea of wanting your life, but caused another group of people to gain the ambition of killing you. That mystic gun today is just a beginning. We have a common enemy lurking in the shadows right now, be it those who are aiming for Extit's throne or constellations. Archduke Lampard's voice was steady and stern. The moment you stepped into Extit and the Northland, our interests have been tied together. That is true. Thales lowered his head, his voice was steady and indifferent. If I die in Extit, it will not be good for the both of us. I will dispatch 2,000 people. Kentvida, my most trusted subordinate, will lead the army and escort you to Dragon Cloud City. Archduke Lampard's expression became gentler. You will arrive straight in Charlton family's territory, and the king's envoys will be waiting for you there. But my people died in the battlefield. They stood in front of me and acted as my shields. They were pierced through by blades, swords, and long spears. Thales lifted his head, his expression was dark. We have also killed plenty of your men. Lampard closed his eyes and remained silent for a while. Thales looked at him, expressionless. Those warriors, be it my soldiers or your subordinates, will not understand the reason why they died. Lampard opened his eyes. It is precisely because of their sacrifice that we have understood each other and are able to sit here to make a decision for our country's futures, even though it will be incredibly difficult. Lampard said softly, we were never enemies to begin with, and as fighting against each other on the battlefield was just due to forced circumstances. For our future and the end of meaningless bloodshed like the one today, we should cast off our past enmity. This is only logical. War has always been to achieve something, has it not? Thales suddenly laughed. Well said, Your Grace. He chuckled softly with an indecipherable expression. There are no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. It is just as you said. From now on, there is no reason for us to be enemies. The Archduke nodded and lifted his goblet. You ate my venison. Based on Northland tradition, you are my guest. This is high-quality rye wine. Lampard pushed his wine goblet over. His gaze was profound. Based on Northland tradition, once we drink from the same cup, we will be allies. I will provide you with all the access to manpower, information, resources, and finances in Extit. Our enemies will not have a chance to strike, Archduke Lampard nodded, until you leave Extit and return to Constellation. A strange light flashed across Lampard's eyes. In fact, they will not be able to attack you, until you are crowned king. There was silence once again. The same indecipherable smile materialized on Thales' lips again. The prince exhaled softly, and his smile did not diminish. Did you say the same thing to Northern Territories Duke Arund, Your Grace? For Constellation and the Dragon's Thrones? He was the one who came to me. Chapman Lampard's gaze was profound. Val Arund is a hero with vision and responsibility. He dared to take the step many people did not, no matter how much that path was not understood by others. We, Constellation and the Dragon, have been enemies for many years. The blade and shield should not have this sort of relationship. Lampard leaned back against his chair. The light from the fire illuminated his firm and cold face. The hero, Riker I and the King of Renaissance, Tormund I were originally good friends. Chara the hero and the Oathkeeper Midir IV were brothers who trusted each other with their lives. If Extit and Constellation work together, we will definitely be able to put an end to these meaningless wars and conflicts. Work together, to put an end to war and conflict. The image of the war appeared in Thales' eyes. The warriors of Extit and Constellation rushed at each other like wild beasts. Baraka roared furiously as he killed layers upon layers of enemies, and left them on the ground, screaming in pain. Countless Fury Guards rushed to Araka's flank without hesitation. Plenty of soldiers had their bodies pierced through by sharp blades and fell to the ground helplessly. And right at the end, when Araka dragged his subordinates' corpses and left with the survivors, the back of the kingdom's wrath stooped low in desolation. No. Thales lifted his head and said coldly. A surprised look appeared on the Archduke's face. He raised his brow and fixed his eyes on Thales. Val Arund is not a hero. He is just a pitiful bug living in his own imagination. The second prince was expressionless. War cannot bring peace. The deaths of others cannot compensate for someone else's life. And hatred as well as anger will not disappear because of the coronation of two kings. The Archduke placed his hands together with no changes to his expression. What do you mean? Thales continued, completely unbothered. What I mean to say is that everything from your mouth is a load of bull. Archduke Lampard's face became grim. The Archduke asked with a sullen expression. Do you realize that you are embarking on a dangerous journey? What you are doing right now is refusing a powerful ally, who will bring you great benefits and ensure your safety, even your throne. My experiences tell me that I should be careful with those who want to become my ally, no matter how sweet their words are and how sincere they appear to be. Thales looked at Lampard, and as he watched his expression grow increasingly sullen, he continued softly, "And I cannot trust you, Archduke Chapman Lampard." "Why?" Chapman leaned forward. Due to the illumination of the swaying light from the fire, he looked even more temperamental. "Is it just because many of your people died?" "That is not the only reason," Thales said coldly. "It is also because you showed complete indifference as well as callousness towards your subordinates' deaths and sacrifice. Forming an alliance with you will mean that we are destined to face betrayal. Compared to the benefits I may receive if I form an alliance with you, I can say with certainty that when the alliance fails, the losses I would suffer will far surpass the benefits." "I know this very well." Lampard's gaze started to become terrifyingly cold. "Also, I despise what you said." Thales remembered Araka's desolate back. He then gritted his teeth and shook his head. "The people on the battlefield died because of your selfish desires. And you can keep that nonsense of dying a worthy death, as well as the goal for war is peace, to yourself." Thales picked up the wine goblet and said with a cold sneer. "Silence." Lampard let out a cold snort and said with a biting tone, "I originally thought that you were mature and level-headed, and that you possessed intelligence that surpassed your age. You are currently behaving like a child." "You are right," Thales retorted coldly. He turned over the goblet, spilling its contents. Then, he spoke to the sullen Archduke Lampard. "And children are not supposed to drink wine." Thales jumped off his chair and left the tent without turning back. Chapter 109 Remnants of Magic. Night. I'm still not at ease about that strange doctor being together with His Highness. Beside a bonfire, WYA looked at another bonfire from afar with a cranky expression. There were only two figures sitting around that particular bonfire, one large and one small. This was the third night since they arrived in Lampard's military camp. Ramon said that he wanted to check Thales' injury privately, and strangely, the prince agreed to it. He is a prince, he can do whatever he wants. Smoking his tobacco pipe, Poutre blew a puff of smoke, which made Ya's expression turn sour. "Just relax, Raymond's fear towards His Highness is not fake. And there are so many of Extit's sergeants on guard here. His Highness' safety is guaranteed." Poutre glanced at the Extit soldiers around them, who were either standing sentry or patrolling. They all had unpleasant expressions on their faces. Poutre then glanced at Ida, who was not far away, and slowly said, "Also, if Ramon really is an assassin, he had too many opportunities to kill the prince in the battlefield before this. Don't forget, he was the one who rescued His Highness." Recalling the incidents in the battlefield, Ya's heart jolted slightly. The young attendant asked worriedly, "Speaking of, what is going on with His Highness?" That time, he wasn't even breathing. Looking at WYA, whose face was filled with suspicion, Poutre narrowed his eyes. The gaunt vice diplomat asked in amusement, "Have you been thinking about that incident?" "Not just that." WYA furrowed his brows. He recalled the incident with a grave expression on his face, trying his best to give voice to the puzzlement in his heart. "His Highness' physique is very good, honestly, it is so good that it exceeds my imagination. No matter how severe his injury is, he recovers in a matter of days. Is this not even more suspicious? And the psionic ability that His Highness said he learned from the Black Prophet, I cannot disregard that." WYA lowered his head. His gaze swept past the single-edged sword in his hand. "After all, that is the kingdom's secret intelligence department. Although His Highness is, at the end of the day, he is still a child, and it is not a good thing for him to mingle too much with the kingdom's secret intelligence department." The kingdom's secret intelligence department, HMPH. With a perplexed expression, Poutre raised his head and blew a puff of smoke in the direction of the moon in the sky. "You think that the kingdom's secret intelligence department is a scary place?" The vice diplomat did not look at WYA. WYA pursed his lips and nodded. The young attendant pulled out his blade. His voice was filled with uncertainty. "I have heard quite a number of stories about that place. Some are absurd, some are very strange, while some completely illogical, but it is undeniable that the mysteriousness of the kingdom's secret intelligence department and the reputation of the Black Prophet are both frightening." "I thought that you would not have heard much about the Black Prophet at your age." Poutre laughed mysteriously. "You have to know that Morat has been in control of the kingdom's secret intelligence department for over 30 years. I suspect that Morat was already working in the kingdom's secret intelligence department when young 82nd was crowned." Wiping his sword, WYA shrugged. "While training in the Tower of Eradication, I heard a joke. Something happened in each of the 4 main secret intelligence agencies in the world. The Red Witch broke a teacup into pieces. The White Ritual Master burnt an oil lamp. The Green Lieutenant wore a uniform until it became old. The Black Prophet slept on a pillowcase until it became torn. Guess which incident led to the most severe consequences?" Poutre inhaled a puff of tobacco and curled up the corner of his lips. "Perhaps there is one more incident. The Grey Sword Guard had worn out a sword sheath." WYA and Poutre chuckled at the same time. Great Master Shao is not as unreasonable and frightening as the rumors say. It is just that as the Tower of Eradication's Tower Master, he has to be more level-headed and cautious. There was a yearning look on Wei's face. He nodded and said, "And apart from his hair and beard, nothing is gray." After joking around, Poutre said slowly with a severe expression, as an attendant, it is a good thing to show concern for the prince you are attending. However, he looked at Caso with a leveled gaze. Would you like to hear some advice? Raised his brows and implied that he was all ears. Every single Jadestar prince is like a kingdom's secret intelligence department. They all store plenty of secrets, Poutre said with a profound gaze. It would be enough to only show concern for those that you need to know. Furrowed his brows. Do not make your life too difficult. Poutre sighed. You need to know that the lives of the princes themselves are already hard enough. Especially because they are from the Jadestar family. Poutre thought in silence. That figure from the past appeared in his mind. Looked at the cackling bonfire, confused. Turned his weapon over and said quietly, Sir Poutre, I still remember your words that day in the birch tree forest. Were you also an attendant? Poutre's tobacco pipe had stopped emitting smoke. The vice diplomat took the tip of the tobacco out of his mouth and looked at The latter raised his gaze and asked with a plain expression, then, which prince did you attend to? Poutre's gaze, which was focused on the bonfire, froze, for a moment. A few seconds later, he spoke slowly, just like, your father. Just that I had more experience, and left the prince's side earlier. Gazed straight at him. His hand, which had been wiping his weapon unwittingly, stopped moving. Is that so, an attendant? The young attendant's expression was complicated, and his gaze was deep. Then, do you have a family? Poutre turned and glanced profoundly at Hilarious, he thought silently. The renowned, cunning fox, of Constellation, the person who played a leading role and was the signatory of the Fortress Treaty, cannot even manage his own family well. However, his gaze immediately dimmed. I am not that much better myself. Listen here, The vice diplomat gently stroked the tobacco pipe in his hand, which was slowly cooling down. His tone was more solemn than usual. Gilbert was a competent and outstanding attendant. He was orderly and meticulous, loyal to his ideals, and aimed high from beginning to the end. He has his own principles. Slowly gripped the tip of his sword tightly. The young attendant asked faintly, even if sometimes, those principles are so callous. Callous, Poutre snorted softly. Sometimes, you must make a choice no matter how hard it is. Before could respond, an unpleasant voice interrupted their conversation out of nowhere. Good night, my two distinguished guests from Constellation. Wearing a thick attire exclusive to the Northland, Black Sand Archduke's subordinate and most trusted advisor, Viscount Kenvida walked over from afar. I hope that I did not interrupt all of you. Smiling, Kenvida sat down across Poutre, who had a ruminating gaze, and who had an unpleasant expression. You have indeed interrupted us. Looked at Kenvida in an unfriendly manner and flicked the tip of his sword, producing a cool rattle. Very good, this means that I have garnered all of your attention. Kenvida took off his gloves nonchalantly and heated it atop the fire. Why are you all not staying in the tents? The weather is very cold, and this is the Northland. We like the outdoors and the open field. Poutre poured out all the ashes inside his tobacco pipe and answered coldly. The light from the flames flickered on his face. A splendid scenery, a fine view. Do not worry, Kenvida smiled slightly, seeing through their thoughts. All of you are in Extit, and Extitians do not have the habit of eavesdropping beside tents. He turned his head and looked at the Prince of Constellation as well as his doctor in the distance. The prince is very safe here. Kenvida narrowed his eyes. He is such a special prince, is he not? Or else, the Archduke would not have given such an appraisal. Snorted in disdain. Poutre furrowed his brows. They have started to pay attention to the prince. That child probably said some strange things in Lampard's tent a few days ago. This is not a good sign. The vice diplomat took out his tobacco bag and grabbed a handful of tobacco. He spoke faintly, it appears that we will have to depart tomorrow. Raised his brows. On the other hand, Kenvida's expression froze. He looked vigilantly at Poutre. You knew. Poutre nonchalantly picked up a burning tree branch from the bonfire and reignited his tobacco pipe. It is written on your face. Also, those sergeants have been going back and forth all night, and is this not the reason you came? To convey your master's intention. There was silence. Kenvida stared earnestly at Poutre, as if he wanted to observe him once more properly. Yes, the Viscount of the Black Sand region said calmly. We are departing tomorrow. The Fire Knight, Lord Tolja, an army of 2,000 soldiers led by me, including 500 cavaliers, will be escorting His Highness directly to Dragon Cloud City. We will not be resting in any suzerain and noble's castle or town on the way. At most, we will be camping in the fields. Poutre chuckled and said, 2,000 soldiers, and circumnavigating castles. Is it to ensure that no one will find an opportunity to plot against all of you? I am seriously worried for your master. It appears that Lampard has also been driven into a corner, with no clue about the hidden masterminds that are plotting against him. Kenvida's expression changed ever so slightly. In the midst of inhaling and exhaling puffs of smoke, Poutre asked in a soft voice. I thought that it was a glorious and proud Northland tradition to keep one's words and be staunchly loyal, but look at this military camp now. Every corner is filled with the smell of conspiracies and cunning schemes. Is there still anyone that all of you can still trust completely? Kenpeda's expression gradually stiffened. Do you know what this is called? Poutre snorted lightly. If a leader sets a bad example, it will be followed by his subordinates, regardless of whether it's King Nuven or your master. Kenpeda grabbed a handful of snow from the ground, softly kneading them in his hand. He watched as they slipped through his fingers and fell on the ground. The Viscount said in a cold voice, do not be overly critical of Northland's internal affairs, citizens of the Empire. At least, on Black Sand region soil, accidents will not happen anymore. Wya put his sword back into its sheath. He felt that something was not quite right about the atmosphere. Accident, that Mystic Gun Unit's training officer may have a different opinion. Poutre put down his tobacco pipe and laughed. Let me give you a suggestion, my clueless Viscount. Kenpeda's eyes fluttered. What do you know? Do not investigate the relationship between that Officer Haddle and the Archdukes or suzerains anymore. It is bound to be a waste of effort. Frowning, Poutre tested the temperature of his tobacco pipe. He was unsure if it was burning well. Why don't all of you look at the downline of his business? Starting from the mystic guns that have been reported as unserviceable but appeared in the black market. Kenpeda looked puzzled. Black market? Ah, Northlander who looks down on mystic guns. Poutre sneered. Compared to directly purchasing mystic guns from the sovereign state, the training required to use them is the most expensive part. There is an inverse relationship between how whole the cores are and how new the parts are with the dexterity of the soldiers operating them. Kenpeda appeared to be pondering about it deeply. Beside them, Wya was extremely confused. The Archduke of Black Sand's Mystic Gun Unit is very skilled, and during the salvo, their aim was also very accurate. Poutre glanced at Kenpeda and tapped the metal tube of his tobacco pipe. According to my experience, unless Archduke Lampod was willing to scrape half of his knights and heavy cavaliers as well as allocate large amounts of funds every month to support the training for his Mystic Gun Unit, it would have been impossible to produce such a unit within 3 years. Kenpeda was absorbed in his thoughts. He has to find adequate economic sources so that he can maintain such a unit by giving them a large amount of training. That way, they can be of use during vital moments. Poutre licked some tobacco as he taunted. Fortunately, it has only been 3 years, and there is only one training officer. After these 3 years, those gunmen will probably be able to carry out orders such as, turn around and fire at the Archduke, scrupulously. Kenpeda paid no heed to Poutre's taunts. He continued talking, enunciating each word, so, he must have found connections in the black market. He obtained money, spare parts as well as eternal oil, and even bribed purchase officers who traveled to the sovereign state to buy cores. In exchange for all these, he provides mystic guns that were supposed to be destroyed according to their agreement. Poutre shrugged and lit his tobacco pipe again. I guarantee you that his contact person in the black market understands him a lot more than those careless soldiers. Kenpeda exhaled and immediately asked, why can't the mastermind cum funder be the one directly giving him financial support? Poutre asked in disdain. If so, all of you would have found clues of him interacting with other powers early on. Would it have dragged on until now? Kenpeda's face turned red. For the past few days, he had been deeply troubled by this matter, to the point that his basic judgment was affected. Wya furrowed his brows. He did not really understand the two people's conversation. There was silence. Upon realizing something, Viscount Kenpeda spoke slowly. Lord Poutre, the secret room once provided information about you. I am starting to believe what they told me. Oh, what an honor. Poutre inhaled a puff of tobacco with an intoxicated expression. What did the secret room say about me? They only have information about you before you left the palace, but it is already interesting enough. Immense interest could be seen in Kenpeda's gaze. Poutre Nimain, the plotter within the palace walls, the calm and collected schemer. Wya looked at Poutre with a surprised and bewildered expression. This man. Poutre turned his head and laughed. Ha, the Red Witch's subordinates really think highly of me. Kenpeda's expression was a contemplative one. No, on the contrary, I feel that it is time that they update their information. Viscount Kenpeda curled up the corners of his lips and put on his gloves once again. People within the palace walls may be good at observing speech patterns and behavioral patterns, as well as being the masterminds of various schemes, but certain wisdom only comes with experience. Poutre made some weird sounds with his nostrils and exhaled a puff of smoke at the same time. Kenpeda stood up and flashed a smile. And another thing, Lord Poutre Nimain, former Viscount of Constellation, that decision to charge in the opposite direction on the battlefield was brave and resolute. Very good. Poutre glanced profoundly at Thales and Ramon from afar. They like me more than you now. Ellipsis. We have entered the borders of Extit, this was not part of our deal. Ramon stared at Thales with an angry gaze. The Extitians are not willing to let anyone related to Constellation's diplomat group go. Thales took a tree branch and stirred the bonfire, pouting the soldiers of Extit around them. He sighed and said, I am only a prince of Constellation with no rights and power. What can I do? You cannot be like this. Ramon gritted his teeth. I saved your life. Hurry up and find a way to get me out of this place. You did not save my life. Thales furrowed his brows. Remember, I was just drained, and in the battlefield, all you did was. We all know that's a lie. Ramon laughed in exasperation. I do not know what you did, but most of the organs in your body had already collapsed that day. No matter how strong your body is, it would have been useless. Even the strongest steeds cannot pull carriages with no wheels. I was the one who did everything I could to stimulate your life's potential. Snap, asterisk. Thales broke the tree branch in his hand with force. Well, it is a good thing that my body is strong. On the contrary, you better lower your voice, as you do not need to talk to check your patient's body, Thales said coldly, if you do not want your pathetic little secret to be found out by others, Dr. Ramon. He placed an emphasis on the word, doctor. Ramon looked around and said with an unsettled expression, speaking of, fine, at least find me a messenger raven. Thales snorted through his nose. No worries, doctor. Thales drew upon the memories that appeared in his mind during the past few days, such as those block-shaped words, which looked like pictures. The people from the gangs will not dare to provoke well-trained troops. You do not have to worry about Blood Bottle Gang. In the end, gangs are just gangs. Ha, Your Highness, do you really think so? Ramon turned his head and flashed a taunting smile. Although Thales was expressionless, his heart sank. Actually, Raymond's words are not without reason. Those two gangs are perhaps not so simple. Especially Blood Bottle Gang, which is supported by Asda and Giza, those two lunatics, the gang is supported by the Calamities. It's so strange. Even though Blood Bottle Gang often does dirty jobs on behalf of nobles who are in a position of power, the threat of mystics cannot be ignored, can it? Why would Constellation allow such a gang to entrench Eternal Star City? Are they confident enough in the legendary anti-mystic equipment in their hands, and think that they can control the mystics? How is that possible? Thales remembered Giza and chuckled to himself in self-deprecation. Although Asda behaved like he did not care about Blood Bottle Gang's fate at all, why would someone as powerful as him meddle in the territorial scrabble between gangs, which does not concern him? Isn't Red Street Market only a red light district? In Black Street Brotherhood, they actually dared to shelter people from the Charlton family, the regicide family, in the capital city. They can even firmly control Blood Bottle Gang, and the latter is even backed by both the mystics as well as powerful nobles. Thales could not help but recall his 5 years in the Brotherhood. Those two gangs have too many questionable points regarding them. And one of them is in front of me. Thales looked at the strange doctor with his big nose. The latter was staring at him amid the light of the fire. Ramon himself is a doctor who harbors secrets. He goes back and forth between the two kingdoms, and is at the center of the conflict between Blood Bottle Gang and the Brotherhood. Thales flashed a smile. A prince is not someone who can simply agree to other people's request. The second prince of Constellation looked at Ramon with interest. Since you have a request, let us make a deal. You can give me something valuable as an exchange. Ramon was stunned. For instance, the origins of those powers of yours. I think that it is very interesting. Thales pretended that he did not care and stretched his body. As an exchange, I will do my best to negotiate with them. At least, you will be able to use a messenger crow to contact your friends in the Brotherhood. There may be other benefits too. Ramon looked at Thales in a daze. He still cares about that. A prince. Wait, if. After quite a while, Ramon spoke with much difficulty. You are Constellation's prince and you have shady relations with Morat Hansen. Ramon gritted his teeth, deliberating his words and the tone of his voice. I am not as stupid as to tell you my secret. Besides, have you not learned the ability to read minds from the Black Prophet? Ramon snorted coldly. Oh, enough of that. I do not feel like digging through your brain for secrets anymore. Thales shook his head. That ability hurts the head a lot. Your head, that is. Ramon stared at Thales. There was a strange look in his eyes. Although you are only a child, you do not look like you care very much about my health. Thales did not say anything. He only stared back at Ramon quietly. Thales said, enunciating each word, I do have some guesses. I have seen the divine arts, and I know how the process is like. However, you do not seem like you have communicated with the gods. That power that you use to cure diseases and save people. It is magic, am I right? Ramon was expressionless. He did not admit or deny it. Thales knew the answer. Magic. Thales exhaled softly. This was a term he had never heard since he came into this world until that night at Red Street Market, which changed his destiny. A long time ago, there was only magic and no mystic energy. This was Asda's words. So, you do not even know the connection between mystic energy and magic. This was Giza's words. It was true that Extinctions did not allow anyone in the diplomat group to leave. However, Thales was no matter what, the Prince of Constellation. If he insisted, it would not be impossible to make Lampard relent and allow the irrelevant Ramon to leave. However, Thales did not do that. Because Ramon could possibly have something that he wanted. Thales needed to exhaust all means to figure out everything related to himself, such as his mystic abilities, and magic, which was closely related to it. Ramon giggled until Thales began to furrow his eyebrows impatiently. The strange doctor stopped laughing and asked slowly, "You are not that close to the Black Prophet, and you are not his student, are you? Or else it would be impossible for you not to know all of this." An idea appeared in Thales' head. He figured out the crux of the problem. Thales looked at the soldiers of Exted around him. He then glanced at the bored Ida sitting at the entrance of the tent, before shifting his gaze to Putre as well as Wya, who were a distance away. He asked faintly, "So, is magic a secret that unsettles even the Black Prophet?" Ramon did not say anything. He only fixed his eyes on Thales. Thales suddenly laughed. The second prince said, "I am a prince, and he is my father's vassal. He sometimes agrees to my requests. That is all, he does not tell me too many things." This is truly very interesting. Ramon widened his eyes. His expression was strange and passionate, as though he had just met Thales for the first time. The new Prince of Constellation is actually interested in such things. This is truly very fascinating. Thales furrowed his brows. What does he mean? Is this something I shouldn't know? In return, I will need to use your messenger crow to send a message to a secret location, but let me ask you one more time, do you really want to know? Ramon widened his eyes and clicked his tongue. Morad will not be happy. Thales clenched his fist softly. I am Constellation's future Supreme King. When he said the word, King, Thales felt his own voice trembling slightly. Do you think that I care if he is happy? Very good, very good. To explain magic to the Prince of Constellation, a descendant of the Empire, Ramon flashed a strange smile. He shook his head, shut his eyes and said, this is not a bad deal, and I can have plenty of enjoyment from it. Thales narrowed his eyes. The prince asked slowly, then, shall we begin? Ramon opened his eyes swiftly. How are your history lessons, your highness? Ramon asked slowly. I am talking about how humans fought against the ancient orcs and utterly defeated them in the Holiness Exorcism campaign, along with how they made peace with the ancient elves as well as the ancient dwarves in the Battle of Survival, then eventually making a name for themselves in the world's history. Thales' face turned red. From the time he was brought to Mindy's Hall, he actually did not have much time to read up on history. Thales said slowly, not very well, but I know that in the process of fighting against the orcs, humans awakened their superpowers, which is known today as the power of eradication. The first batch of knights. However, Ramon cut him off. So your lack of knowledge is not just limited to magic. Brimming with energy and vitality, the strange doctor looked at Thales. You do not even know about the history of wizards and the magic towers, do you? Thales furrowed his brow. Ramon laughed mischievously. So just like most people in the world, you live in this big web of confusing and unsettling fears that is also made of self-deceiving lies. Take the kingdom of gods and the 7 layers of hell for instance. Lies, fear. Those history books all mention these things, right? That the knights and the powers of eradication brought about the rise of humankind, and that the longswords of warriors and the nays of battle steeds freed us from the oppression as well as the threat of the ancient orcs. Ramon asked meaningfully. Thales recalled the knowledge he learned from Gilbert in Mindy's Hall. However, before Thales could reply, Ramon firmly uttered a word with a hateful expression. Lies, disgraceful lies, downright lies. Thales was stunned. Lies. Ramon spoke with an excited expression. Knights, superpowers or powers of eradication did not allow humans to defeat the orcs, wizards did. With a passionate expression, Ramon extended his hands and clenched his fist softly in the air. It was magic. Thales furrowed his brows a little. The second prince asked in great doubt, do you mean to say that the superpowers, the Northland military sword style, the knights, all of them are fake? That they actually did not stand a chance against the orcs, and that the only things that brought about victory in the front lines of battlefields are wizards and the magic they use. Their magic is an even stronger power than the power of eradication. While pondering over this, Thales asked the second part of his question slowly. Comparing magic with the power of eradication. You are just like those ignorant people 1,000 years ago. It appeared that Ramon was not really used to being cut off. He snorted in disdain. Open that narrow mind of yours, your highness. Magic is not a power. It is not on the same level as the power of eradication. Ramon shook his head. His eyes were filled with longing and respect. It is something higher, deeper and mightier. Not a power. Thales put on a puzzled expression. Then what on earth is magic? A curse, an energy, knowledge, a factor, an element, a mentality, an extraordinary psionic ability, a destructive force. Ramon looked at Thales in silence. His gaze was filled with a combination of contradicting and strange emotions such as respect, idolization, arrogance, modesty, and enchantment. Thales had never seen such a gaze from anyone in this world before. No, Thales suddenly came to a realization. Perhaps, he had seen it before. In that dim chess room. That figure in a blue shirt. Magic. Ramon raised his hands and slowly extended them, like a devotee who was praying to the gods. He was so excited that he was shivering. Magic is a meaning, an attitude, a belief, and a principle of life. The strange doctor gazed at the sky, as though it held the place that he belonged to, along with his dreams. Wizards are the practitioners of this principle. They believe that everything in this world is meaningful. Everything can be analyzed and should be recognized. In the process of this perception, humans can become more perfect, mightier, improve themselves and become closer to the truth. From the regular patterns of the sun's movements and the mystery of the origins of life, to human attitudes and principles, and the progress as well as development of history, everything is in the domain of magic. Magic is the sum of all acquisition of knowledge, discoveries and truths. The advancement of magic will bring us a more glorious future. Thales furrowed his brows deeply, trying his best to understand Raymond's words, which sounded rather insane. For this, they once entered the tent of the ancient chauvinistic tribe and designed the first political system in history, the ancient chauvinistic country. They once stood beside Takmik, the deceased king of the north, and warned him about our relationship with the orcs. They once stood behind the Iron Blood King, and with their knowledge as well as experience, they designed and supervised the completion of mankind's final defensive line. They once relentlessly improvised their weapons and skills amid sacrifices and defeat. They summed up the experiences and skills of every knight by themselves, perfecting the first set of standardized, Northland military sword style, in history. They once noticed the potential within the human body too. They researched day and night for those powers to be born and developed, naming them superpowers. They once spared no effort to charge forward in battlefields filled with blood and fire. They tried their best to develop lethal skills while they improved their healing techniques as well. They once studied iron and steel intensively, forging stirrups and saddles, as well as establishing the first cavalier unit. This allowed the knights to possess speed and an offensive force comparable to the orcs, for the first time in history. Of course, they also developed their own powers. They unearthed the truth behind materials, interrogated the truth behind consciousness, stirred up natural energy for their own usage and converted the world's resources so that they could be of service to humans. The power in my hands is only a small and insignificant part of it. They once launched an attack together with the knights on the layers of ice in Glacier Queeker. After countless assaults, with no regard for the sacrifices made, they utterly eradicated the myth that it was impossible to defeat the orcs' large heavy infantry formation. It made the Holiness Exorcism campaign the most magnificent and glorious scene in human history. They once even questioned the existence of the gods and challenged the Emperor's authority. At one time, the three great magic towers were the wisest and most advanced existence in the world. They were detached and independent from the world. Even the Supreme Emperor and the head priest of Bright God Church, who were extremely influential, had to show their respect to the three towers. There was a time where the existence of wizards made many people believe that in this world, power and status were not the only things worth chasing after. There was also truth. Ramon inhaled deeply and slowly put down his hands. The corners of his eyes were already glistening with tears at this point. He clenched his fists, trembling as he said in a choked voice, "These are wizards. This is magic, the most important, magnificent and precious chapter in the rise of human history. Yet, they have been forgotten by everyone." Ramon lowered his head and said desolately, "And now, no one remembers magic and knows about wizards anymore. There are only people like me, who are unfortunate and fortunate at the same time. While struggling with our feeble existences, we burn the embers of what remains of magic through books and scrolls written about them." Thales stared absent-mindedly at Ramon. He did not even realize that the tree branch in his hand was burning. He could not believe everything that he just heard. He could only widen his eyes and drop his jaw. Magic, wizards. This was different from any version of magic he had heard of in his past life. It did not consist of sizzling fireballs, muttering curses to control elements, using oneself as a trove of unlimited mental power, conducting ceremonies to communicate with another existence, and the learning of psionic abilities or powers that were formidable for the sake of being formidable. Magic was a meaning. A belief. A principle. Thales was completely taken aback. At this moment, Asda's words kept playing in his mind. Wizards pursued the truths of the world. They used all kinds of ingenious methods and wisdom to take advantage of the natural resources and energies in the world, to create an even more beautiful world. Is that so? Chapter 110 paid homage. Exit, the road to Dragon Cloud City from Black Sand region. Here, I will still give you a piece of advice, Your Highness. Put those two flags away, especially the Constellation National Flag, the double cross-shaped stars flag. Amid a troop of advancing Northland soldiers, Viscount Kenvida held the reins in his hands as he rode to Thales' side, even though Thales was tightly protected from all sides. Kenvida ignored Poutre and Waya's extremely unhappy looks from the side while he spoke to the second prince. "Although we have 2,000 well-trained Northland elite soldiers, many of them being the regular troops by the Archduke's side, it is obviously still not the best choice to let everyone on this journey know that the Prince of Constellation is here." Thales was not at all in the mood to pay attention to the snowy scenery on both sides, as well as the faintly discernible mountain range and occasional wisps of smoke far away in front of him. The reason why he ignored the Northland's majestic scenery of snow-covered mountains was partly because he was still pondering on what Ramon said to him 2 days ago, another part was because of the horse under him. He currently rode alone, and he controlled the horse under him very carefully in case the horse decided to fling him off its back from time to time. Ralph anxiously followed beside Thales, and he was prepared to support and hold up his young employer using his wind power at any time. Although Gines and Gilbert had already taught him almost every horse-riding trick during his 1 month in Mindy's Hall, it still seemed that Thales could not get along with horses naturally. Regardless of whether it was the little pony in Mindy's Hall, or the usually docile and obedient Northland noble's horse he had borrowed from Archduke Lampard, which had been specifically equipped with child saddle, it was obvious that both horses did not want him to ride or even approach them. Oh, right, saddle, did Ramon not say that this is also a wizard's invention? So, is magic a science of this world? And wizards are a group of people who are committed to the study and exploration of the truth. Then what is the mystic energy about? How did magic disappear? It's a shame that our conversation that day was quickly interrupted by Kentvida. It seems that I have to find another chance next time. Thales panicked when he watched the horse beneath him cross over an uneven snow pit, then he released a breath of relief. I thought, for a diplomat group to show off their flag to indicate their identity, that it should be for an international convention. Thales turned his head around and looked at Kentvida helplessly. At the same time, he paid careful attention to the saddled horse under him, which chewed its mouth in dissatisfaction. Also, we have an army of 2,000 people that forms a continuous line of several hundred meters from beginning to end. With such large movements, even if I do not erect my flag, will the people really be unaware that the Prince of Constellation has set foot on Extit territory? Or rather, it is Archduke Lampard who feels that there is actually no benefit in showing the people that he is far too close to the Prince of Constellation. Kentvida offered him a smile. Your Highness, please believe in the Archdukes. But Poutre cut him off, since he had no choice but to send out 2,000 soldiers to ensure that the prince will not perish in his territory but still has to display an appropriate hostility towards Constellation for the citizens of his own country to see. Archduke Lampard's circumstance is actually quite difficult, excluding the cost it took to mobilize the territory. For all the money he spent, he was still unable to acquire Broken Dragon Fortress. It is also really too arduous for him. Poutre slowly smoked his tobacco pipe and gave Kentvida a sneer. Kentvida's expression became a little sour. It was not reflected in the previous journey and battle, but Thales had a feeling that once Poutre started to have contact with people, it seems that the vice diplomat would return to his most comfortable state on the battlefield. Kentvida had come to Thales' side a few times during the journey and intentionally brought up political topics, but Poutre had answered back, sometimes with humor or sometimes with words that would cause someone embarrassment. Regardless of what the Archduke of Black Sand's motives are, whether it is beneficial to you, you should communicate directly with King Nuvan and not an advisor working under the Archduke of Black Sand. This was Poutre's calm, discreet explanation. Lampard had officially withdrawn his troops 2 days ago, and the diplomat group had also departed at the same time. On the backs of the jolting horses, they would leave the northern plains today and enter the Sighing Hills. The southwest section of the hill was still part of Black Sand region, but northeast of the hills was the territory under the jurisdiction of Extit's Archduke of the Reformation Tower, the Trentida family. Even though Thales had rejected Lampard's goodwill and suggestion of an alliance without any sign of hesitation, Archduke Lampard still generously allocated 2,000 soldiers to Thales. Of the 2,000 people, the regular soldiers would protect Thales on the journey, whereas the recruits would gradually disband and return home. Thales also did not know if he should say that the Archduke was generous, hypocritical, or both at the same time. At this very moment, a knight with a grey helmet separated from the infantry formation in front and rode his way to their side. Thales could feel that Ida's state slowly changed from boredom to anxiety when she rode her horse behind him. In fact, after Thales was soaked by that fluctuation, it seemed as if all of Thales' organs had some minute but real alleviation. It seemed as if the fluctuation was not only something to rely on during emergencies, yet its presence also gradually altered Thales' body, but it was exactly what Thales was most worried about. He could not really remember how he died when Serena strangled his neck. Or rather, he had no memory of what happened during that time when he was temporarily unconscious. But Thales always felt that he had experienced something important, and that fluctuation appeared after he awoke. Raymond Pass is just up ahead. The knight with the grey helmet that came from the front was a supreme class elite who had previously confronted Araka on the battlefield. The Fire Knight, Tolja, solemnly reined his horse in and rode with Thales in the same direction. He gravely said, "There is a village where we can rest and eat. We will continue our journey in the afternoon, and let the scouts go forward to make discreet inquiries at the same time. After all, we will reach the Archduke of Reformation Tower's area of jurisdiction soon." Thales keenly noticed that both Poutre and Waya's expression darkened slightly after Tolja finished saying the phrase, Raymond Pass, whereas Kentvida curved his lips into a smile. "What do you think about this, Your Highness?" Without waiting for anyone else to speak up, Kentvida gave Thales a smile and said, "Regardless of whether it is a practical or personal reason, I recommend you to stop and take a rest at Raymond Pass so that you can touch up or pay homage." Personal reason, pay homage. During Thales' uncertainty, Putre rode to his side and sighed deeply. Raymond Pass is the southwest starting point of the Sighing Hills. It is also the only road entering the hills from the Northland Plains. The slim vice diplomat extinguished his tobacco pipe and furrowed his brows, whereas beside him, Wya turned his head. But that is also the final place where the former second prince of Constellation, Prince Horus, had perished during the Bloody Year. Putre said without any hesitation on his face. Thales' face changed when he understood the reason behind everyone else's change in expression. Obviously, Kenpeta found a topic that Thales had no choice but to answer. Alas, it concerned the war between Extit and Constellation. As the Prince of Constellation, Thales lowered his eyelids at the appropriate time and sighed. Of course, Horus was also my blood relative. Kenpeta laughed as he nodded, but Thales was also secretly muttering in his heart, the swordsman of eradication praised by Kessel, and the general from the royal family with the strict military regulations praised by Sonia, died here. But this is also an opportunity to gain further understanding about the truth of the Bloody Year. He turned to Putre. What is the prince's cause of death? Putre sighed in the face of Thales' question. He was the first person to answer. It was the end of the Bloody Year. That winter was abnormally warm. King Nuvan gathered an army of almost 10,000 people from the 7 archdukes. They had abundant food and weapons when they attacked the fortress with weak military strength from all sides. At that time, the southwest battlefield had reached the juncture of its final battle in Constellation. Duke John cornered the last main force of the rebel army at Blades Gap. The victory of the rebellion war was approaching, but that also meant that they were unable to head north to help. Reinforcements for Broken Dragon Fortress was far in the indefinite future. Putre shook his head and put away his tobacco pipe. He then continued with a complicated gaze in his eyes. Trebuchets, ballistae, mystic guns and numerous city infiltration units, they faced uninterrupted onslaught and were never bothered by any sacrifices. Prince Horus believed that it was only a matter of time before Broken Dragon Fortress would be breached by the enemy, so he took the risk to attack. He brought a few units to secretly cross the pine forest and suddenly infiltrated Extit's supply line from behind. Wya sighed deeply. The next person who took over the conversation was the Extit commander. That was a risky decision, Kenpeta chuckled. Obviously, this was Constellation's miscalculation. Horus lost his bet, and paid the price for his decision. Wya glared indignantly at him. That was a good decision, at least it went straight for your crucial territories, Putre snorted coldly as he replied. Thales furrowed his brows and he did not know what to say in that moment. It was best for him to keep quiet at that moment because of his identity. He had heard about the royal family's tragedy during the Bloody Year from Gilbert. In his story, it was Horus who stepped into the Extition's trap. And Gilbert's statement of saying that there was no reinforcements during those 3 hours, seemed like he was hinting to Thales that Horus's death was the same as the other royal family members, that they died because someone had set them up. But according to Putre and Kenpeta, it seemed as if it was Horus himself who took the risk to attack, and he brought the consequences upon himself. And since the place was so far away from Constellation's border, did the phrase, no reinforcements during those 3 hours, not seem extremely normal? He needed to know more. Beside them, Tolja spoke up at this moment. That was indeed a sensible decision. After he heard Tolja's view, Kenpeta's expression became unhappy when he looked at the Fire Knight. Tolja's solemn voice made Thales furrow his brows in an instant. Horus succeeded half of his plan. He managed to burn and destroy almost a quarter of our supplies. Our supply line was too long and too fragile, and his move at least bought quite some time for Broken Dragon Fortress, Tolja said in a deep voice. He sounded like he was defending Horus against an unjust accusation. If we had not detected it earlier, and if King Nuvan did not stop attacking the city, had the frontline main forces withdraw, and did not set an ambush on the way back to the fortress. Yes, we blocked Horus on his way back from Pine Forest and forced him to the plains. Viscount Kenpeta snorted. He seemed as if he was quite dissatisfied. Just like how we capture a fox. Putre's expression fell. Thales also felt very awkward, whereas Wya had an indignant look on his face. Any Constellatiate would be unhappy when they listened to an Extichian tell the story of how they killed a prince of Constellation. But Lord Tolja once again opened his mouth to speak. It is unfair of you to put it this way. After all, he only had a little over 1,000 people. He was heard saying seriously, we used an army that was almost 20 times larger than his and firmly surrounded Horus on the plains. But his warriors were all rare elites with willpower as strong as Northlanders. Under their counterattack, the Archduke of Elifer City's troops faced serious casualties. The Archduke of Beacon Illumination City and the Archduke of Prestige Orchid's war flags even, at one time, faltered and retreated. King Nuvan had no choice but to use the resting soldiers and sent the elite White Blade Guards under him to block the gap. Only then did he manage to stabilize the battle line. The battlefield was extremely disastrous. Even the rising black smoke was visible to the fortress. If Broken Dragon Fortress sent reinforcements at that time and made a sudden attack from the side of the chaotic battlefield, they might have stood a chance to save your prince. Putre grasped his reins tighter in his hands. Thales was momentarily stunned. But they did not dispatch the army. Thales recalled the scene from a few days ago when he had encountered the besiegement below the fortress, and asked in puzzlement, the fortress did not send out the army. No, I still remember that from afternoon till night, the people in the fortress watched Horus's troops collapse one after another in the plains, Tolja said indifferently. Thales recalled what Gilbert said and he furrowed his brows together. There were no reinforcements during those 3 hours. Regarding this point, there was certainly a reason behind the fortress choice, Putre said with a stiff face. Oh, come on, Kenvida snorted coldly. Even Extichans felt bitterly disappointed when we witnessed how they turned away a dying man. Turned away a dying man? Thales held the reins tightly in his hands and clenched his teeth as he endured another jolt from his horse. Kenvida glanced at Thales with a slightly meaningful gaze. Of course, maybe they were as cautious and careful as the fortress flower 2 days ago. So, who was it? Thales turned around and asked in confusion, who was the person who guarded the broken dragon fortress when Horus brought his troops out to attack? Putre had a worried expression on his face when he turned his gaze upon Thales. Go on, Kenvida chuckled, tell your prince who was responsible for Horus's death, this is not some secret anyway. Thales suddenly realized that it was quite inappropriate to discuss the matter in front of an Extichian. Putre glared at Kenvida in dissatisfaction, but he still sighed and answered, the Northern Territory was in a crisis at that time. The previous king ordered the surrounding nobles to go forward and provide help, and reinforcements of the largest scale came from Land of Cliffs region, the closest dukedom of Constellation to the Northern Territory. Putre worriedly observed Thales' expression until he was sure that the boy's emotions did not change drastically. While he did that, he said, and after Horus left, the commander of Broken Dragon Fortress was naturally the person with the second highest rank at the time. Thales was slightly stunned. Putre furrowed his brows but he still continued, that was the current duke of the Land of Cliffs region, One-Eyed Dragon, Koshter Nanchester's older brother. Later when the Broken Dragon Fortress had been breached, he was held captive by Extit, and in the end, died in prison. Thales jolted right after Putre finished speaking. The former Duke Nanchester who was also the current Duke Nanchester's brother, could he be related to the suspiciously strange death of Horus? At least, when Horus was surrounded, the One-Eyed Dragon's older brother did not lend a hand. He did not even save him and watched him die, right? More importantly, had Kessel also thought of it this way? What about the One-Eyed Dragon? What does he think of it? What does he feel about Kessel's perception on the matter? And the One-Eyed Dragon's brother whom had already died, was it really? Also, what the One-Eyed Dragon told me before I departed from Eternal Star City, the Land of Cliffs region did not want to resign itself to death. That was what he said back then. As Thales pondered about the relations in this matter, his brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Putre patted Thales' saddle and shook his head at Thales. Do not think too much. Thales felt that this was what he meant. At that time, Horus probably felt like there was already no hope in returning to the fortress. The Fire Knight, Tolja caressed a sheathed sword on his saddle. He seemed to be recalling the past when he said with a bitter smile, he made a decision that nobody had expected. Putre shook his head, his face showed his desolation. Thales raised his brow, what did Horus do? He did not break through towards the direction of the fortress anymore. Tolja put on a respectful smile on his face. Just like you, Horus turned around and broke out of the encirclement in the opposite direction, all the way to the north. A thought appeared in Thales' heart. Just like us. Thales recalled what the man, once known as the Kingdom's Wrath, had said to him a few days ago on the battlefield, before they broke towards the direction of Lampard's flag. Long ago, a Jadistar once told me during an impasse, if we are unable to retreat, then why do we not go forward with all our strength? So, what Araka had said was, for a whole day and night, they escaped to this place. We, the army of Black Sand region also pursued them to this place. Tolja had a complicated expression on his face. He raised his hand and pointed at the snow-covered hills that had just started to appear in front of them. Thales turned his gaze towards them. They had reached to the end of the plains. Black mountains half covered in snow began to appear in front of them. Between the two low mountains, there was a narrow entrance that was only as wide as the road. The advancing speed of the Extit troops slowed until it came to a stop. We have arrived, Viscount Kenvida said faintly, this is Raymond Pass. Thales looked at the cluster of strange stones in front of him that were covered in snow while he asked Tolja with an odd feeling in his heart. This is the battlefield of that year. We cornered them, and once again, had them surrounded tightly. Horus's remaining troops held their positions beside those stones. Tolja nodded and said with a deep gaze in his eyes, the former Archduke of Black Sand lit a torch and personally led his guards to assault continuously from all sides. He also commanded his guards not to use their bows. He wanted the glory of capturing a prince of Constellation alive. On the other hand, Horus defended his position under the nine-pointed Star War flag. He personally held his sword while clad in his black armor. Regardless of how the people around him fell one by one under the axes, he never took a step backwards. The best warriors of both parties pounced at one another while they roared in anger, and then one by one, they fell in between the stones. Although we had the advantage of a great force that night, All 4 supreme-class experts from our side were injured, one of them even lost his life here. The Fire Knight seemed quite rueful when he talked about the history of the battlefield, whereas Kenvida chose to keep quiet as he stared at Tolja with his brows furrowed together. Horus's sword pierced through my chest with a single strike. Before he could strike a second time, I was yanked down by someone behind me. Tolja sighed and touched his right chest. Thales furrowed his brows. Was that the sword of reversing light? Prince Horus learned his sword style from the Tower of Eradication, and he also had experience from the army in the battlefield. Only the enemy of the wolves could compare to his brave name in the Jadestar royal family's history, Putre said slowly. His face had a profound expression when he stared at the cluster of strange stones before his eyes. Thales heard Ida snort lightly behind him. The old Archduke of Black Sand gave up on his motive. He realized that his intention of capturing Horus alive will only result in more casualties on our side. In the final, fierce battle, Horus beheaded the unending fire, Terran, despite suffering more than 10 wounds on his body. Then, his heart was pierced through by a sword. Tolja prompted his horse to move forward and he stared at a stone that was half the height of an average man, as if he had returned to that night 12 years ago, the night where swords shone in the shadows of blades were everywhere due to war. A prince lost his life here. Kenvida shook his head. This place will probably become memorial spot for sightseeing in the future. Wya glared fiercely at him without any mercy. Yes, Putre replied sarcastically, you should build a statue for Prince Horus, to commemorate his bravery and fearlessness, as well as his skills in killing the enemy. Thales sighed, closed his eyes, then bowed deeply towards the land filled with the strange stones stood. They were yet another group of unfortunate people who died during battle. The last of his soldiers also lost their fighting spirit when they saw Horus collapse. And when we thought that everything was going to end here, a soldier by Horus's side managed to snatch the bow left by Terran in the middle of the chaos, Tolja continued to say faintly. Kenvida's expression suddenly changed. Thales raised his brow and said with some surprise in his voice, you are saying. Tolja gazed towards the south, and he exhaled a long breath. That soldier carried Horus's corpse, took the bow, roared like a deranged man with arrows sticking out of him and while covered head to toe in injuries. He led the last remaining few soldiers and rushed out of the encirclement. For some unknown reason, we could not stop him. He continued charging until he reached the old Archduke of Black Sand, and then. Tolja revealed a meaningful smile that was difficult to understand and he snorted lightly. That soldier disappeared into the night amid of the chaos. Thenceforth, Uraka Merc has been known as the Kingdom's Wrath by the people. Tolja caressed his sword, an unending desire to fight glinted in his eyes. Thales took a deep breath and gazed at the cluster of strange stones from afar. But he could not tell that 12 years ago, numerous warriors and a prince lost their lives at this place, and another legend had since then become famous. No, there are still some doubts. Thales turned over towards Tolja. So, Lord Tolja, you personally experienced the war between the two countries 12 years ago. Including how the Broken Dragon Fortress was breached. I had participated in that war. The Fire Knight nodded, but as I had mentioned just now, thanks to Prince Horus's sword, I was injured in the early stage of the war. By the time I entered the battlefield again, a few months had already passed and it was the late stage of the war. At that time, Sonia Caesar led her Starlight Brigade and took in disabled soldiers as well as disgraced warriors, including Merc, and they headed north to fight a few battles with us. Oh, Thales had a realization. You battled against the Fortress Flower before. I should say that he was truly one of the Extits, 5 war generals. No, I did not have a chance to fight against her. Tolja furrowed his brows, because of a despicable rat. Despicable rat, Thales was slightly stunned. Who? I do not know. Viscount Kenvida laughed. Constellation's little trick. Tolja took it to his heart all this while. Do not know who it was. Took it to heart. Extit's Fire Knight was heard giving out a cold snort. On the battlefield, a damned fellow disguised himself as one of us and hid himself behind my back. He waited until I breached the enemy lines, and when I was just about to attack the core of the Starlight Brigade's battle formation, that despicable fellow attacked me from behind. I was seriously injured once again and did not manage to get the chance to directly confront Caesar or Merc. Tolja furrowed his brows and said through clenched teeth, I still remember to this day that the damned, despicable assassin ducking out of sight as he escaped. He hid himself behind a strange, purple mask and he used a grey short sword. He appeared and disappeared unpredictably, and was extremely fast. Thales emitted an, oh, with a strange expression on his face and scratched his head. Disguised as someone else, attacked the enemy from the back. Purple mask, grey short sword, appeared and disappeared unpredictably, extremely fast speed. These traits and habits, where have I heard about it from? Behind him, Ida lightly snorted again. Is that so? Thales furrowed his brows as he stared at Tolja's cold eyes. He nodded sternly and said, such an act is indeed despicable.